call to order the meeting of the Finance Committee for Thursday, March 7, 2024. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Couple housekeeping things here. First of all, if you could please silence your cell phones, that would be wonderful. Second of all, the meeting is being shown live on SMAC and recorded for future viewing on the internet or wherever you choose to view it. Looking for a motion on this?
That we open the public hearing.
Second.
Motion and a second on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. First item on the agenda, Article 18, Community Preservation Committee FY 2025 Budget Report. This is part of the annual town meeting articles.
And Article 18 is on page 16.
Whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Mark Zemanian, Chairman of the CPC, Community Preservation Committee. I want to thank you all for having us tonight. We're going to start out with our budget, which is Article 18. For the record, on February 22nd, 2024, the CPC voted by a vote of 8-0 to approve our budget. At this point, I'm going to turn this over to our treasurer, Michael Barrett, who is with me next to me here, and next to him is Barry Kassler, our program administrator. Once the presentation's been made, if you have any questions, we're all happy to answer them. Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
Okay, does everybody have the presentation? A little different doing it off a hard copy, but we can handle that.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, just to clear up just housekeeping stuff. So the material that was handed out tonight is new information that's not in the warrant. So I just want to make sure that we're, that when you're directing us to the information, should we use the material they brought instead of what's in front
Yes,
of us?
Mr. Lurie, we should use the recent information. The warrant was printed before the CPC voted their Article 18 budget.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if we can just look, turn to page 2 is kind of a table of contents. Want to cover, first couple of slides are going to cover FY23, the activity since the last town meeting, what we now know about actual revenues and actual expenditures. Take a quick look at CPA projects in progress, what we've spent during fiscal year 2024. Then we'll turn our attention to the various components of the budget, starting with the long-term debt schedule and a breakout of debt service by year and debt service by category. After we go through debt, which should be pretty straightforward, it's basically the same schedules you all looked at last year, but we'll cover what changed in them, but very little. We'll look at the unauthorized but unissued debt service, which is just some additional interest that we put in the budget. Then we'll turn our attention to the appropriations and reservations that are new for fiscal year 2025. Then we'll talk at the end about the CPA revenue and funding sources. And then the final page is just all of that brought together on a single page using the standard format that we've used since we adopted the CPA many years ago. So if I can turn your attention to page 3, this is a breakdown of the FY 2023 actual CPA revenue as reported by the town on Form CP2, one of the required forms that every city and town that has CPA has to submit. We first got this in December, and the good news is that it shows a significant increase versus prior year's income. We actually questioned a couple of the line items because they were way out of line in terms of prior trends, and as much as I'd like to have that money, I want to make sure it's correct. I talked recently with the new Director of Finance and asked her to look into it. She got back to me and told me that the collections from the local surcharge, which is the second line down and under the fiscal year 2023 column, was reported at $1,080,701, was overstated by about $110,000. No impact on the budget. We took it into consideration even before we knew what the right number was going to be, because we thought it was a little bit high and we didn't want to get too aggressive. Another line that was very high on this is the earnings on investment, which was $200,908. And the answer on that is that it's really a reflection of market interest rates, that for the last few years prior to 2023, we were earning a fraction of a percent, 1/10 of 1% interest. Now we're earning 3, 4, 5% on various investments. That makes a huge difference. So that number is correct at the $200,000, they assure me. But overall, we were up about $500,000. Take 100 off, it's still $450 over the prior year and well above the budget for fiscal year 2023. Next page, page 4, is a breakdown of the actual expenditures. Typically, we look at these by category. And again, I've given you FY22 for comparison, FY23. Had a couple of issues with these numbers. They reported correctly in total, but they had the categories wrong on the expenditures. What you see here in front of you is the correct amounts in the correct categories. So again, the total spending for projects of $172,609 was correct. The CP2 shows the breakdown a little differently than what we have here, but no impact in total. On the debt service, it was reported on a single line, and I think you all know we were short a Director of Finance, town accountant for most of last year. They had brought in a consultant who did a little bit of this work for them, and it took maybe the easy way out by putting it all on a single line, but it helps us to look at it and understand it by category. So I went back in and broke it out by the appropriate categories here. The next line down is the administrative expenses. No issues with that. We spent $30,853, which is significantly below the prior year and well below the budget. I mean, in line with what we typically spent. In 2022, we had some additional activities going on between the COVID relief program that we were administering, as well as looking at the possibility of setting up the housing trust. So we spent a little bit more money in 2022. Overall, this leaves us with a fund balance of about $7.8 million in the CPA funds on the town's books. That's at the end of fiscal year 2023. Next page, a little bit busy. It's a list, page 5, of the CPA projects that are still in progress. There are 21 projects that are ongoing. What you've got here is the breakdown showing each line item as a project, when it was approved, how much it was approved for, how much was spent in fiscal year 2023, as well as how much was spent in fiscal year 2024 up through January 2nd, which is when we first put these charts together. So we see, looking at the bottom line here, that we had spent $172,000, same number that we saw on the CP2 in 23. As of January 2nd, we had spent $152,000 in fiscal year 24. We updated that number for our meeting last night. Through March 5th, that number is now a little over $200,000, with another $340,000 already encumbered against these projects in fiscal 24. So we're back on track with making progress on a lot of the projects. And you can see the bottom ones are the ones that were approved last June. So no monies were really spent early on, but we're starting to move along on them. And the other important thing on this chart is it tells you at the final column is there's about $3 million remaining to be spent on all of these projects. We obviously can't overspend a project. We typically underspend by a little, but we should, somewhere down the next couple of years, spend up to that $3 million. Okay, page 6 is the CPA long-term debt schedule. This is a schedule put together by the town. I've added a couple of columns here to try to facilitate the discussion we had at the CPC, but it's a list of the 17 bonds broken down, shows you when they were issued, what the interest rate was, what the life of the bond is, how much the bond was for. The 17 bonds totaled $4,251,928, And at the end of fiscal year '25, the balance on those bonds will be about $2.1 million. So we'll have paid off a little over $2 million. Some of them are completely paid off, you can see, as you look at it. And then at the bottom of the page, again, it's just broken out by category. It's how we tend to run the committee and look at things. So it's there for information. Page 7 takes that same information and just spins it by year so that you can see the principal and interest payments every year from 2013 all the way out to 2040, which is when I think our last payment on those existing bonds is. Highlighted kind of around the middle of the page is this year's interest and principal on long-term debt for fiscal '25 is $345,297.50. So that's just so that we can see. It helps us to look at it. You can see if you look at where that dark underline is at the year 2033, the Glen Echo bond is dropping off at that point. It'll be fully paid, and you can see the significant drop in interest, principal, and in total payments. So we know, just to give us a view of where we're going with those payments. Page 8 is kind of the same information going out between 2023 and 2035, just by category. Again, it's the same dollar totals spread across the years, but just so that we can look at it in total by year, across by category. We don't really need to get into the details on that. Page 9 is a breakout. We also need to include in the budget every year for authorized debt. That's bonds that were approved at town meeting in prior years that the work has not been completed or the bond has not yet been issued, may get issued at some point in fiscal year '25. So we put some money in the budget to cover that. You can see the 3 outstanding ones. There's still a little bit of money left on the old Glen Echo acquisition. We're still in the process of negotiating a conservation restriction there, so we've held some money open. At some point that will get bonded. I don't think we'll spend the full amount there, but you never know. Some Cape and Reynolds recreation facility and equipment, a couple of other smaller bonds that could end up getting completed and done, and so we carried $10,000 for that. We put some money in for one of our new projects, the Hebrew Senior Housing, in hopes that it will get approved, and if so, that if we need to issue that bond at some time during fiscal '25, there'll be some money in the budget to cover it. I mean, what we put in here was 6 months worth of interest. So, and again, a breakout by category just to break it all up. Page 10 gives the detail of the debt service by individual project for fiscal year '25, showing which of the CPA accounts that the bonds will be charged to. The open space recreation, the historic resource, community housing. You can see, as in the past, most of the activity is run through the undesignated fund just because of the way the balances ebb and flow on these accounts. But individual bonds going across are all there. Middle of the page shows that same number on the authorized but unissued. At the bottom is a list of the 7 new projects which you're going to hear tonight, far more detail. One note I will make is at the time that we prepared this, we were working off an old set of article numbers, so the articles 38 to 44 really became articles 37 to 43, but just a little miscommunication going on in there. And again, typically, we try to spend the debt service and the project money out of the most restricted funds first. So it's better to spend the money that's in the reserve for open space, historic resource, and community housing before you spend undesignated, because the undesignated just gives us much more flexibility. Not really that big a deal, but it is there. I break this out. I mean, and in the past, we'll see on the final page all of these things pulled together, but it becomes very hard to read and very hard to display, not that we're displaying it here. Page 11 is kind of the guts of the budget, if you will. The top section has the CPA commitments and abatements, and we're showing 3 years, the fiscal year 2023 actual, the current estimate for 2024, and then our projection for 2025. You can see the very minor, modest growth going on. We project 1 or 2% a year growth in these things, just to be conservative. Those commitments, I believe, is a number that actually comes from the Board of Assessors, provides that, and it represents what they expect to bill our taxpayers during the course of the year. That's the first estimate. The town actually files a form called the CP1 with those reported numbers. Down below it, we have On the top, the first line of the second box is our funding sources and the beginning fund balance. And this is the beginning of fiscal year 25 projection for the balance in open space, historic resources, and community housing, and the undesignated. The total you can see is 7.6 million, so we had about 7.8 at the end of 23, so that would suggest we expect it to go down a little bit. Those are money that are available to be used on any of the projects, and they don't really affect the budget other than it kind of directs how much can go into each of those buckets. So we show that here. Next line, the CPA surcharges. Because of the concern we raised on the CP2 reported local surcharge being a little bit higher than we expected, or I should say a lot higher than we expected, when I spoke with the Director of Finance, we came up with, instead of, historically we've budgeted that line at 95 or 100% of the prior years, 2 years earlier, actual local surcharge. What we did this year is we backed it up a third year to 2022, grew it basically at 2.5% a year for 2023 and 2024, and then 3.4% for 2025 to stay in line with the overall increase in taxes. Came up with a number of 965, which is what we budgeted before we knew that the corrected number was 970. So I think it just reaffirmed that what our feelings were correct, but also I think it shows the good relationship we have with the town and working together, and it's a joint effort. I may be the one sitting here producing this, but a lot of this, in fact, most of the information came from the town. And we've kind of pushed back, and we get it to where we think it makes sense. So that number is 965. We got a state reimbursement. The state typically recommends, and in this year they gave us a 20% of the 2024 net receivable, which is another reason those numbers are up above, and that's another 194,000. State's always been very conservative. Typically, we've received much more than their projected amount. We did get a note earlier this week from the Community Coalition, Community Preservation Coalition, that it is possible that the state could run a little short this year and may end up only being around the same 20% that they told us. So I think that's still a pretty good number. Investment income and other, we usually have about $10,000 in each of those accounts. That number is probably low for 2024 based on what we learned about the investment income in 2023. That number should come in pretty favorable this coming year too. Not for forever, but at least for the next year we should be in good shape. Total of $1,177,312 in new revenue for fiscal year 2025. Adding that to the reserves actually gets us up to $8.8 million, $8,749,835 available for project spending and paying off our debt. Next page pulls the last 3 pages together all into one. This is the more standard format, maybe prettied up a bit, that we've always looked at with the commitments at the top, the funding sources and revenue in the middle, the appropriations and reservations, and then I put a single line for debt service and appropriations instead of trying to squeeze 12 or 15 lines in for one and 7 lines for the other, which would make this chart almost impossible to read. At the end of the day, even with the $3.6 million in new projects that we're proposing in fiscal year 2025, we're projecting that we will have a balance of about $4.7 million at the end of fiscal 25. And that's assuming that all that money gets spent. So, and that's it. That's the budget. Be happy to field any questions.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Elliot, do you have a question on this?
Not a question, but a congratulations. This is very nice, very clear, easy to understand, easy to read. Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
Thank you.
Joel, do you have a question or comment?
Yes, I do. I agree with Elliot. This is really a very clear presentation, very good information. And as usual, I have a tendency to look at things that I know something about myself personally. I notice under the CPA long-term debt schedule, you have 3 bond issues for the senior high school tennis court and soccer field lighting.
Yes.
Why was it done in 3 that work was finished in 2018, 2019.
You know, typically, as the town is doing all of their bonding, they look at what is available, and they chose, there was projects, they can bond partway through a project, halfway through, three-quarters of the way through.
Even when it's done?
What do you-
The project's done. The project was finished in 2018, 2019.
And that's when the bonds were issued. You can see
Oh, I
in the
have
middle
one here
column
that
when the
was
bonds were
fiscal
issued.
year- I have a fiscal year 2022 issue for,
Okay,
yes, I'm on page 6. Sorry about that.
and which particular bond are you looking at?
I'm looking at SHS tennis court and soccer field lighting.
And if you read across that page, you can see that it was annual town meeting, Article 39, in May of 2017 is when the
Right.
project was approved.
Right.
That bond was issued in October of 18. It was a 14-year bond at 3.402% for $790,000.
I'm looking a little bit further on down.
And the next
That one I
bond-
happen to agree with.
Are you looking at the tennis court and soccer field lighting number 2
And number 3.
and number
Mark.
3?
Okay,
Yeah.
so number 2 was issued in October of 20. So a couple years later, for another $24,000, so some more work had got done and paid for, and they bonded it.
What?
Yeah. So if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, we don't control when the town issues the bonds. We make a recommendation to town meeting approves that or doesn't. But if they approve it, then it all reverts to the town to issue those bonds.
I understand. I guess I'm a little confused of why you're issuing bonds after the project is complete, but,
You'd have to ask
Because they had a
the town
balance-
on that one.
okay.
They had a balance of funds that they paid out after the first bond was issued.
Right.
Town meeting approved them to borrow that money, not to use cash.
No, I understand that. I
So-
understand, but I
asking the
just
timing of-
assumed that the bonds would be issued, okay.
All at once, yeah.
Yeah,
I
all right.
believe we might have an answer here. I think we have the finance director here. Perhaps we could get an answer on this.
Do you want to?
Hello, Elizabeth Zaleski. This is the new finance director, everyone, in case you have not met.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome. Please use the microphone.
Oh,
Just pick it up if you want.
I'll pick it up. Okay. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Elizabeth Zaleski. I'm the finance director. And based on the information that they're presenting tonight, what will happen is we will go out and we will take a ban, which is temporary borrowing, which is probably the case in this instance. And then at a later date, we'll bond when the project is.
So basically, you issued a ban, and then now you're taking the bond to pay off the ban?
No, not in this case.
No, bans are what the town does, not what you do. You issued your authorization to do a borrowing, a complete borrowing, but we will take part of the money at the time. It's called a ban, and then we bond the total amount. So it's a temporary borrowing.
Okay.
I'm confused then, because the town schedule says there was a bond issued for 14 years in October of 18. That's
Correct.
more than a ban.
No, but what you don't see on these schedules are the bans, the temporary borrowings that we do. We borrow money until we do a large ban or a large borrowing at the same time to save on the expenses of borrowing.
Understood. We had that. In fact, last year at this very meeting, at town meeting, we approved paying off a ban because it had been sitting there waiting on the railroad station for $320,000.
Yes.
And it was a couple years old, and we couldn't at the time go ahead and borrow against it because the definitive use of the railroad station had not been established.
And that was just created.
And we kind of turned around and said, you know what, why don't we just go, the committee recommended, why don't we just pay the bond off? We had the cash available.
Correct.
These are two separate bonds issued, in fact, three separate bonds issued on the project, is what he's asking.
These three markings here.
With
I
the-
mean, what she says makes a little sense to me. I can see where the regular bond issue for the major portion of the work, number one, and then as you might have some invoices trickled in, you might have used bond anticipation notes to pay those invoices, and then over time, when you do your general obligation bond, you basically have part of that general obligation bond to pay off the bond anticipation notes. I mean, that's typically how I've seen it done in other communities, so.
Correct.
Okay. In that case, Mark, I have a question for you.
Sure.
How do you determine when a project is complete and can no longer be drawn on?
Thank you for the question, Joel. It's a good one, actually. Prior to approximately 3 years ago, I'm guessing a little at the number, the projects continued on until the town notified the CPC that they were done with the project. 2 years ago, I believe, we, as a committee, set a policy that directly follows each of the recommended projects when they're approved at town meeting. So applicants are required to correspond with us every 6 months, including when the project is being finalized. Those updates help us understand where the project is. At that point in time, we have the applicant sign a closeout sheet.
Oh, good.
Something we created.
Oh.
We then send that to the Director of Finance, who signs it, and we officially take a vote to close any remaining funds out and return them back to their respective categories.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
One thing I'll add,
Good plan, by the way.
the schedule we have in here of projects in progress, we regularly review, and that's when we'll kind of pick off and say, hey, we're either running out of money or it's getting old. We really started to push to do exactly that, but there is a form.
Mr. Zemanian has confirmed that he never runs out of money, so I'm good.
Well, if we ran out of money, that would be a problem. It's called not overspending. It's not a credit card.
Well, thank you very much for that explanation. Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee on this? Article 18. Yes, Adam?
How you guys doing? So I had kind of a question about the balance that's left. So you get about 4.7 million left after that. So just kind of curious, I did some research online just to see if there were any kind of benchmarks as to how much a reserve you should hold in an account like this, I guess. Couldn't find much out there. I know we were talking about reserves last week. Really didn't have any benchmarks for those. But so I was curious that how the process works. I think people who have projects and think that they can use CPC money come to you with a project description and you guys vote on it or whatever the process is exactly. Is it possible for you guys to go out and kind of find projects or like kind of look through the warrant and say the town is spending this money, maybe CPC money can go against that so the town's not spending it and it can come against this? So it's kind of maybe a little backwards as to how the projects currently work, but just trying to find a way, because you have, 4 years of revenue in reserve, you have 12 years of debt service in there. So unless there is a reason why we're holding that much in reserve.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your comment, and I'm going to let Michael talk a little bit about the money part of it. But from the CPC's standpoint, traditionally speaking, they don't seek out projects. They took what was brought to them at the time, oftentimes from town staff, because they know the path a little better. A few years back, when I became chair, we instituted a policy of reaching out to the public to get a sense from the residents, because this is their money. Okay, it's our 1.5% that gives us this money, and this money is specific to provide community benefit. So we wanted to get a sense from the community, are we moving in the right direction? And we actually received one in particular that I can remember, an application from just a resident who had some open space that was being threatened to be developed. She didn't want that to happen. She went through the process. We assigned a CPC member to the process, and that was passed, I believe, last year, was it not? At town meeting. That was the Benson Road article. For me, that was a wonderful thing to see a resident engage in that process. We always run advertisements every year before our public hearings to generate as much interest as we can from the public. And I mean, we're seeing more and more private applications. Stoughton Youth Baseball has come to us. The lacrosse program has come to us. Some community housing projects have come to us. So I actually think getting the word out there here is a good thing. As far as the dollars go, and we do try to inform the public as best we can. As far as the dollars go, I'd like Michael to touch a little bit on what we actually have available and why we're choosing to spend the money the way we
Yeah,
do.
one thing to clarify there, that $4 million flows from that budget schedule. What it really isn't telling us is two important pieces that we have. One is the $3 million that we saw on the projects in progress. There's no projection as to when that will be spent. I probably should add a line there just to bring those together and make it a little clearer. But typically, we haven't gotten to that total. But so you've got that $3 million and then the $2 million out future debt payments. So we've kind of accounted, although we've accounted for it, but it's not like that $3 million or the $3 million that's coming in this year is all going to get spent in the next year. And so.
And if I could follow up with that, Adam, when we looked at a particular project we're asking to partially bond this year, I actually went through that process. Is, well, what if we paid cash? And Mike informed me that, well, if all our applications were called at the same time, we don't have enough cash.
Okay.
So it became a little bit of, okay, so which of these projects make sense to bond and which makes sense to pay cash? There is a formula the coalition provides for us. Multi-generational benefit projects are good projects to bond, whereas recreational projects that have a sort of a limited lifespan are not ideal to bond. That doesn't prohibit us from doing it either way, but it, I think, educated the committee as a whole on when it's smart to do this and when it's not.
Sure.
We also take a look at what we have for bonding capacity. So there's a little bit of a complicated equation that needs to be looked at, but it's funny because you read this and it's like, yeah, I got 4.7 million, but I don't.
And that's kind of what I got. So almost,
and that's a bummer.
Yeah, if there is a line almost with that allocation for the current year taken out or something like that, so it wouldn't look like there's such a big pool, available to be used.
I think in the future, Michael.
Actually, we were looking at it, that's the smallest number anybody has seen.
Really?
When you're looking at what we have. But yeah, no, I think it is a good, as soon as you asked the question, I'm like, yeah, because I knew that. We knew that because we had talked about it. I probably should have made it a little clearer in here.
Yeah.
But on that note, Mark kind of alluded to, the CPA legislation restricts the borrowing capacity to strictly be against the local surcharge. So we can't take into consideration the state reimbursement or the interest income and other stuff.
Gotcha.
So that kind of limits us that we can't go too far with bonding.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Appreciate it. This is really well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, you have a question?
Thank you. Yes, Vaughn, to you. I, too, like the material. It looks very easy to read, generally speaking. I didn't quite get the highlighting and the font color change. I like seeing the color change because it helps on the eyes, but I didn't quite have a legend so I could understand what I was looking at. But the other...
Think of it as a behind the scenes. In building my spreadsheets, typically, values I input, I put in blue. Formulas are in black so that I know looking at the screen that it's coming.
Yeah, so this is kind of like a mixed feeling kind of thing, because we love information in the Finance Committee. You've probably heard our meetings in which we're hungry for information. And you, in spades, you did great at that. We like to get the information early enough so we could digest this before the night of the meeting, though. So I want to just, to you, Vaughn, just to kind of express, I never saw this before.
We emailed it to...
This material?
Yeah, to the chair of the Finance Committee 7 days prior to this meeting.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, it's 29th of February. I ensured that poor Barry had to do some extra work as did
I apologize
Michael, to get that to
then.
you.
I apologize. I take that back. I take that back. I do want to ask a question. Actually, from the previous speaker, opened the conversation up about the pool of money question. I just wanted to, when you go back in time to the beginning of this, when the whole CPA came into town, there were some pretty big projects that made a lot of sense. There was the Glen Echo, the high school, the Cape and Reynolds, that people really wanted to see something done about those giant projects. And it kind of like when we set the 1.5%, it kind of made like, oh, that's a reasonable number. It's not maximum, but it's a number that we can kind of get to those projects on. But those projects are gone now. So when we saw what happened after those projects were starting to get funded, and there was a lot of borrowing going on at the early stages of CPA, that we all of a sudden started to see, like, lack of projects. It's like, well, where are the next projects going to come? The money keeps piling up at 1.5, but the projects aren't keeping up with the pool of money. So isn't another way to look at the problem of piles of money just keep growing and not finding avenues to use it is to lower the percentage? Drop it down to 0.75 instead of 1.5%, and then the taxpayers, when you really see the shift happening with new projects like the South School, you see the police station, you see these kinds of projects going on that are outside the scope of what CPA can do. So isn't that another way to look at how to take care of taxpayers, which is take something off of CPA so it could help with the pocketbook of people when they're doing their budgeting, to say, okay, well, I picked up, savings on the CPA side, and it's going to help offset something on these other projects coming through.
Mr. Chair, may I respond?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Through you. I'm not quite sure where you're looking at this as a need for a reduction. As a matter of fact, what I'm finding is that as we progress through the years, the cost of the projects are now exceeding our available funds. We've gone from having a pretty exceptional pool of actual available funds in the roughly $7 million range to this year, where we had to actually look at perhaps borrowing the money. We ultimately ended up splitting one of the articles that is multi-generational and recommended that we bond a portion of it and pay cash for the other portion of it. The point I'm trying to make is we have not lacked in projects. As a matter of fact, we ran a survey back in, was it 2018 that we ran the survey to the community, or was it 2020?
2020, more like 2020.
In 2020, and I'm tough on the dates sometimes, let's spin it around in this head of mine. We asked the townspeople of Stoughton and got an excellent response from that, and their focus at that time was recreation. We proceeded to fund a series of cash-funded recreation articles and still find ourselves very heavily laden with applications on recreation. This past year's, which happened to be the latest recreation project, was a playground for the school. It is required that be ADA compatible or compliant, I should say. It had some drainage issues, and it was very important that the playground be fully inclusive to all the students in Stoughton and all the residents in Stoughton. That was $1 million playground. It's a lot of money, but that was an entire year's earnings that we received. So I think as you see the cost of these projects, the Dennison Fields project will be coming to us at some point in the near future. Those are heavily used ball fields and playing fields that are in desperate need of renovation, desperate need of a facelift. Millions of dollars there we're going to be seeing. These aren't going to be small projects. I'm kind of surprised, given all the good we do, that you're not advocating for a rate increase to 3%, which many towns actually do. We'll stick with our 1.5. I think it's working, but we do now need to be cognizant as we approach new projects that are becoming more expensive due to some of the things that we need to have as a town to provide for all of our people, not just a few select. We're seeing the costs continue to rise, and we continually work with the town to find ways to reduce those costs. Matt Cachone, being the gentleman who handles most of the recreation projects, minus anything we see from the school, he's constantly working diligently to reduce the costs. He'll come to us and we'll say, sharpen your pencil. He'll come back and he'll do this until he gets it right. And that's what I love about Matt. He's impassioned about what he does. So thank you for allowing me to answer.
Thank you very much for that
If I can
explanation.
add a little bit there, that in terms of the projects coming in, I mean, last year we had 11 projects for $2.3 million. This year we have 7 projects for $3.6 million. We've got more going on with the CPA in the last 2 or 3 years than we had the first 10 years. I mean, it's just going in the opposite direction from what you're describing, with all due respect.
Well, thank you very much for that. Do we have any other questions or comments on the... Joel, you have a question, comment on this?
Actually, Yvonne, for you and John, I have the old version of the warrant. If I'm looking at Article 18, does your version have the numbers in it?
Yeah,
Could you tell me what that, it's all right.
these all went down.
Joel, through you,
When
Mr.
they
Chair, we
voted the-
actually provided all our current motions in one of those handouts that we placed before you.
When they
Just for
voted the
convenience.
warrant, they got rid of some articles, and it affected
Numbering of all
the
the...
numbering of the articles once they removed
But
one.
we didn't know
But
that.
they did a handout tonight with all the current. Okay?
That has the
Thank you.
right number.
I can give you a new warrant as well, but,
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
yeah.
Yes, Mr. Enzavino?
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for your
Evening.
presentation and all the paperwork. Makes it easy. I'm looking at your page 5 with your ongoing projects or projects in progress. And I noticed a number of them from last year haven't really started yet or what have you, but I see a few on here that have been around for a while, and I believe you said you do track them and you,
We do.
so, but a couple jumped out at me, for the rehab of Fire Station Number 1. Am I reading this chart right?
That is being closed.
We actually, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, we voted last night to close that. It was one Barry caught and said. So you remember the town had an article to rehab all 3 fire stations. That I think was sort of confused a little bit. When I saw this, I says, Barry, you're right. That's an oldie. I says, let's call Mark and make sure that this is something we can close out. We did, in fact, vote to close it out last night.
Okay, because, I think they said they had spent, almost 99,000?
Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
So we're returning the rest of the money to the CPC.
All right, so you're saying this was prior to the new station, the rehab, and of 1 and 2, as well as the new? This
Correct.
is something different.
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe it was Dr. Grimm who came to the CPC with an emergency or an urgent review article requesting funds. They had a problem with the roof that had made the stairs dangerous.
Okay. Yep.
It was a
Yep.
historic building, so it ended up being recommended and approved under historic preservation.
Yeah, no, that's fine, because, I'm thinking with the latest one, what
Yeah,
have
no,
they,
it had-
what have they done?
We never got anything on the latest grouping.
Sure.
There was some talk about applying for CPC funds, but that never happened.
All right, and not that I'm picking on these people, but do you have any idea what's going on with the old fire truck? Have you got any reports on that recently?
We do, actually, and I'm going to let Barry give the update on that.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks for that question. We do get regular updates from Joe McCrisky, he's been shepherding that project, and the fire truck has been disassembled. The engine has been sent out to be rebuilt because the person who was rebuilding the truck body and all the equipment that goes on it, they're not engine rebuilders, so they sent out the engine. So basically, the truck is apart in pieces, the engine's being rebuilt, the chrome is being replated, and the pieces that need to be replaced are being replaced. It's a long-term project. He said it could take up to 18 months, all in all, but the project is underway.
Well, that's great. I know it's been a few years since it went out. That's why, and I think the last time we were asking, we were actually trying to find out where the truck was because nobody seemed to know. So I'm glad they found it, and I'm glad they're working on it.
A couple of weeks ago here at Town Hall, I ran into Joe McCrisky, and he pulled out his phone. He's showing me pictures of them doing the work, and he's really
good.
excited about it. So
Oh, that's
it
good.
seems to be moving, and there are a lot of POs or contracts issued out against that in the encumbrance column, which isn't shown here, but
Well, that's good. Like I said, the last time we were actually just trying to find out where it was, so that's an improvement that it's actually being worked on. And I think you mentioned now that I think at some point in time anyway, maybe from the start, but I think it came about after a while, you actually have somebody from the committee that's kind of assigned to monitor these projects and track them and make sure the funds are being spent or not spent, or whether you're going to pull anything back. Is there anything out there now that you feel has been just hanging too long that you'd be looking to try and rescind anything? Or have you had any issues with these projects as far as the money and so forth?
So from the committee's perspective, things continue to move at a municipal rate, is a nice way to say it.
Understood.
From a personal standpoint, it can be somewhat frustrating, but the good news is, and I'll use the example of the Hanson Playground. Ms. Husseini gave us an update for our meeting last night. And I was glad I was in there and not out here, to be honest with you. But at any rate, she gave us an update. They're well on their way now with not only the design parameters, but scheduling things. I believe we had a scheduled date of early spring 2025 for construction. It's a slow program. Matt Cashone in the multi-sport playground has been another one. He ran into some minor details with the contractors. That's still very much in progress and looking to be moved forward this year. There was a little frustration with the seeming slowness of these projects, but it's one of the reasons we implemented the policy, because you'd forget about them half the time. It was like, oh, wait, did we give money to that? It can be that long. So by having the policy, Barry is triggering a 6-month review process. So every few months it pops up on his calendar. Hey, check in on this. Regardless of who's sitting here next year, that policy will continue to be in place and implemented. And that was the real fun of being able to get that stuff together, knowing that it'll continue with or without us.
All right, no, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Laura, do you have a question on this?
Yeah, I do, and it's building off of the same kind of conversation. So you've mentioned a few times, the effort that you're putting in to revisit these things and track them and track the progress, which is obviously really important. But are these projects forecast? Like, is the spending actually forecast, where you have a schedule of when, and granted the municipal rate of work, which I really enjoy that term, but, knowing that we can expect a certain rate, whether it's fast or slow, is there effort being put into the projection of spend? Because to your earlier point, where it looks like your fund has a lot of money in it, but if everyone came calling at the same time, we'd have a problem. If you're doing forecasting, plus or minus, right, is that something that might help you be able to anticipate what you actually have to spend moving forward versus really what you just have hanging in the balance?
So that's a great question, and it's a little bit of a two-part answer to it. Our primary focus is on the physical progress of any given project, and the money should follow behind the physical progress within a reasonable period of time, although admittedly, I think to a previous speaker's point, the tennis courts is a good example of how it doesn't always come along with the physical progress. That piece is kind of out of our control. That's a matter or a mechanism of how the town chooses to package bonds and things like that. It was also one of the reasons we found cash expenditures, when possible, to be helpful, because it's a little easier to get on. We're not worried about, when the bond is going to be issued and things like that. It's simply pay the bills, and theoretically 45 days later, it's all done. With all that said, and I've lost the second part of the question. Isn't that awful? I'm getting old.
well, to add in, Mark, when the issue came up that you referred to earlier, where we were concerned about where our borrowing capacity is going to be.
Yeah.
we looked out, and instead of taking each project and saying, oh, I think so much is going to be here and so much, we looked at it was all spent in the next year or two. So without necessarily breaking it down and saying, A, I don't want to see projects going for 5 years if we can avoid it. I'd like to think, and part of what we've put in place is a grant agreement to try to ensure that these things are done within 3 years, and so that we only have to look out 1 or 2 years and keep track of it that way.
If I could expand on that,
Use the mic.
we have what we call a grant agreement for non-municipal projects. And for municipal projects, we have a memorandum of understanding, which is essentially the same, more or less the same agreement. And that has a time period on it of 3 years. If the work isn't done in 3 years, they can come back and ask for an extension, but that brings them back. They can't, it's not just open-ended. So that way we have some control over it, and it doesn't just go on and on and on.
Thank you very much for that. Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee? Article 18, Community Preservation Committee FY25 Budget Report. Any questions or comments from the public on Article 18, Community Preservation Committee FY25 Budget Report? Please step forward and identify yourself for the record.
Can I borrow your microphone?
Oh, please.
Yes, hi, Karen Clip, Precinct 8. As a resident and a town meeting rep, I appreciate the new format of this report. It is much clearer to see where some of the money is coming and going. For my little feeble mind, I don't have a finance mind, but I'm concerned. On all your projects, so far it's been town-owned property, town-owned projects. Here we're coming into a nonprofit that wants to have some of our CPA money. I'm against that. I've worked with this nonprofit organization in a previous job. They've got money. They don't need our CPA money.
Excuse me. If we're going to talk about another project on here, let's wait till we get to that one.
It's not all accumulative?
Yeah, we're going to try to keep
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
misunderstood.
No, that's no problem at all.
Then I misunderstood. I'm
No
sorry.
problem. But if one of the other projects comes up and that's what you're referring to, and I'm not sure which one, then come back up
I
with
just
it.
thought that once you're talking about the CPA report,
yeah.
all
They,
on the
they
report.
did have a line item in here for that, but
Okay.
We do, yeah.
The budget encompasses everything, and then you're kind of going to get separate presentations.
but we're going
Each
to,
one
we're
of the
going to have
seven
those
proposals.
articles
That
specifically.
we're recommending this year.
Generally, what I'm saying is CPA money should not be used for anything other than town projects. If anyone comes in out of town and proposes a project, nyeh. It's our taxpayer money. You want to come in and do something in our town? You put the money up. That's my say. That's what I want to say.
Do we have any other questions or comments from the public? There's a mic
They had them.
right back there, too, behind Barry. And there's a microphone there,
Right there.
No, he's
Yeah.
looking for an agenda.
in case you want to. Do we have any other questions or comments from the public on Article 18, Community Preservation Committee FY25 Budget Report? Hearing none, we'll go to the next item on the agenda, Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support.
Page 31 in your,
Page 31 in the warrant, $2.3 million. Yes, there are more agendas on the table up there.
Could we ask SMAC to bring another mic when they have an opportunity? I'm sure they can hear me. Oh, well.
Mark, can you scooch over a little bit? Yeah. How's that? Thank you. As much as I love you.
We'll just pass the mic around until we... No, we didn't bring the agendas. That was finance. Oh, thank you, my friend.
Thanks. It works.
You don't think it works?
There is another microphone on the way, I've been told.
When you're ready.
Do you have enough mics over there?
For now. Yep.
Okay, great, continue then. Feel free, whenever.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Article 37 is the Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Housing Project. This was determined by the CPC that it met the requirements of the CPA law under community housing. And on On January 3rd, 2024, we took a vote of 8-0 to approve $2.3 million. That is $1.3 million to be bonded in Phase 1 and $1 million to be paid in cash in Phase 2. And at this point, I am going to turn it over to Deb, Kim, and Attorney Crimmins from Hebrew Senior Life, representing.
Thank you, Mark. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for the record, Attorney Barry R. Crimmins of 909 Washington Street, here on behalf of Hebrew Senior Life. Mark has mentioned a couple of the things I was going to touch on. I'm just going to touch on the article very briefly, and then Deb and Kim from Hebrew Senior Life, who are with me here tonight, will speak about the project in a little bit more detail. Couple of things. First of all, I want to thank Mark and the members of the CPC, particularly Barry and Mike, who have been very helpful to us in this project. And certainly the CPC has been very supportive of this project. You heard Mark mention that we received a unanimous vote to recommend this article at town meeting. We were before the Intergovernmental Relations Committee on Monday night and also received the unanimous support of that committee as well. And I think there's a very important reason for that. You saw from the CPC's budget that the CPC is in very sound financial position. One thing, if you look at that budget, that you did not see is there has not been a housing project, a community housing project, to come before the CPC in a number of years. And for the COVID. Right. And that, of course, is unfortunate. Many of you know that I'm a longtime member, longtime chairman of the Stoughton Housing Authority. We had a project several years ago that got the support of the Community Preservation Committee, but unfortunately, for various reasons, did not go forward. There is a tremendous need in this town for affordable senior housing. It's very difficult to get the full array of the folks on the committee, because it's more than 180 degrees, as I'm noticing. As a member of the Housing Authority, I can speak from firsthand knowledge about the need for senior housing. If any of you have had experience, you may have experienced the length and time of our wait list for senior housing. So there is a tremendous need. In fact, the Housing Authority is one of the groups that voted to also support this project, for very obvious reasons. It's because of that need. That need has been identified in several different contexts over the years. It's been identified in our master plan. It's been identified in our housing plan. And throughout these studies, the theme that has come through loud and clear is we need more affordable senior housing in this community for our residents. And you'll hear tonight about how this project is going to benefit our residents and the town as a whole. This is a project I'll just finish with, just to orient you. I do want to make one additional comment, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Somebody asked the question about what does the CPC itself do to encourage applications. And the CPC, for better or for worse, really isn't in the position to go out and solicit applications from folks. They can only respond to the applications that they receive. Certainly if they hear of something or they're contacted, as in our case, they can recommend where they see it appropriate that an applicant apply to the CPC for funding. And they did so in our case, and we welcome that opportunity. We very much appreciate the support that they've shown us, both from an operational standpoint, but obviously from a financial standpoint as well. $2.3 million is a significant amount of money. It represents about 2% of our overall project cost. But nevertheless, it's still a significant amount of money that we appreciate their support on. You did hear tonight, as I mentioned earlier, that the CPC is in very good financial position. So we're coming, I guess, at a good time when the committee and the town is in a good position to support this project, and at a time when, as I mentioned, there is a desperate need for this type of a project. If you're not familiar, the project is located on Canton Street at the corner of Simpson Street. For some of you old townies may remember it as the Lipsky Farm property. We own, Hebrew Senior Life owns the property, so we already have control of the site. This is not a site that we have a purchase and sales agreement on. We own the property. The project is proposed to be constructed on about a 5.5-acre parcel of an overall 25-acre site there at the corner of Canton and Simpson Street. The reason it's relatively small in relationship to the overall size is we're bounded by some wetlands on the site, which restricts where we can actually build the project. You heard from Mark's comments that it's proposed to be built in 2 phases, each of which will have approximately 100 units. $1.3 million is to be allocated for phase 1. That amount is the amount to be borrowed, as Mark mentioned. The other $1 million is allocated for phase 2, both of which have triggers that require that we start construction within a certain time period of town meeting approval. And as with all CPC projects, there will be a grant agreement that will be required to enter into. And as Barry mentioned, we'll be required to come before the CPC on occasion to update them on what is happening with the project. So with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for indulging me, and I'd like to turn it over to Deb and Kim from Hebrew Senior Life to talk more about the project itself. You have handouts, the copies of our deck slide that give you some information, so feel free to follow along with those handouts, and then when we're done, we'll be happy to answer any questions that the committee or members of the public may have. So thank you again.
So,
Kim?
thank you for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. My name is Kim Brooks. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Senior Living for Hebrew Senior Life. I'm here with Deb Morris, our Vice President of Real Estate. I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of our organization since we are new to thinking about operating here in Stoughton, and then turn it over to Deb to talk specifically about the project. We are a nonprofit organization. We've been around for a long time, established back in 1903. Our entire organizational focus is on older adults. So we serve about 4,000 people every day, mainly across 7 campuses in and around the greater Boston area. We do that through our healthcare offerings, which include long-term care, short-term rehab, home and community-based services, and then also senior living, so affordable supportive housing, and our continuing care retirement communities. We also do a lot of research in the field of aging, and we teach about 1,000 people every day in all every year in all different disciplines across the field of senior care. We also have a number of specialty programs, and I'll just highlight a couple because they're the kind of things that we do as a nonprofit supporting older adults, things like our Center for Memory Health, Center for the Prevention of Elder Abuse, and then an evidence-based model on the intersection of housing and services. All of our growth now organizationally is focused on developing more affordable senior housing. You've heard there's a great need for it. And so we have been doing that on a couple of campuses, most recently on our Randolph campus, Simon C. Fireman community. We just opened this fall 45 new units of affordable housing, bringing that campus to 205 units. And then we just last week moved our first residents into a new community in Dorchester, called Leland Community, and that's 43 units of supportive housing. So we are excited to think about this property in Stoughton and bring some affordable housing here. I'll turn it over to Deb to talk specifically about the project.
Thanks, Kim. We think that this proposed 200-unit all-affordable senior housing community will bring a lot of benefits to Stoughton, starting with some of the economic benefits. For every $1 of Stoughton funds, we will be leveraging between $43 and $44 from other sources, primarily from the state and private equity investors. Another way to say that is for about $11,500 per unit, the town of Stoughton will receive 200 deed-restricted affordable senior housing units, which is we think a good return on your investment. Additionally, we intend to pay taxes to the town of Stoughton, which will be north of $200,000 a year after both phases are built out and occupied. We are paying the full complement of fees, whether it's building permit fees, sewer connection fees, zoning review fees, and those fees are in excess of $600,000 per phase that we will pay to the town of Stoughton. And then during construction, we'll be creating probably 300 construction jobs, and certainly we'll look for Stoughton residents to apply and obtain those jobs. And then there'll be permanent jobs associated with the new community. Additionally, as Barry mentioned, there's more than 5,000 people on the Stoughton Housing Authority waiting list looking for an affordable senior housing unit. And we want to partner with you and the Housing Authority to provide exactly the kind of housing that residents from Stoughton seem to desperately need. We will request from the Commonwealth that up to 70% of the 200 units be set aside for residents from Stoughton. So there'll be a strong local preference there. We were able to successfully obtain that local preference percent at our new community in Randolph and in Dorchester, and will likely also request and receive something close to that in Brookline as well. So we know how to make that request, and we have a successful track record in obtaining approval for that request. Additionally, as we build out 200 new units, and hopefully most of them will be occupied by seniors who live in Stoughton now, they'll be able to sell their homes to the extent they have a home to sell. And those homes can be then used to attract new families who want to inject a lot of new energy and excitement into the town. So you'll get that growth and you'll get that mobility and that excitement that I think you all want to generate here by us allowing seniors to move out of their homes that might be too big for them now, move into a service-enriched new community, sell their homes, and bring in new residents for the town. And then, we want to be partnered with you on your commitment to environmental sustainability. We are designing this community to be Passive House certified, which means that we will be using virtually no fossil fuels whatsoever in the property, potentially with the exception of domestic hot water, but other than that, there will be no fossil fuels used. We will be looking to install solar panels on the roof, and we want us all to be proud of this community when it's occupied, and for people to feel like they are living in one of the most environmentally sustainable senior housing communities, potentially in the Commonwealth. And then finally, as Barry mentioned, it's really a beautiful piece of land that we own, and we would welcome the opportunity to partner with the town to think about how we can create additional walking paths even off of the property's sight line so that anybody can come and enjoy the areas surrounding the community. To build this community of 200 units, it's probably going to cost more than $105 million. As you know, inflation and construction costs have been escalating recently. And every day that we're not in construction, the costs are going up. But right now, what we're estimating based on cost estimate for the actual community and a project that we have in construction right now, we're estimating it will be about $105 million, of which $2.3 million we hope will come from the town of Stoughton through its CPA funds, and the rest will come from either the state or private equity investors. So that is sort of what we've had a successful track record in doing in other communities and that we hope to do here. So as Barry mentioned, the $2.3 million is absolutely critical. We cannot proceed with the project without it. But the leverage that it enables us to get from other sources is really the magic that will make this community work. In the handout, we've included some renderings. We look forward potentially next week to submitting a full 40B comprehensive permit package to the Zoning Board of Appeals and beginning a thorough and rigorous design review process. But these are the renderings that we intend to submit to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we're excited about what the property looks like, and we're excited to sort of begin the design review process with the ZBA, hopefully within a couple of weeks. We also included a slide on sort of our schedule and where we've been. So we've been working on this already for a couple of years, and really during 2022 and 2023, our focus was meeting with town staff, which, in addition to thanking Mark and Michael and Barry for their incredible advice and assistance, we've had really wonderful cooperation from so many different town staff people, and we do want to publicly acknowledge how helpful everybody has been to us. We've also met with the Stoughton Council of Aging. We met with all of the residents and all of the Stoughton Housing Authority senior housing communities. We really wanted to understand what kind of additional services that they might find useful. And as you likely know, there's a Stoughton Housing Authority community that's adjacent to our proposed community. And so we really see ourselves as opening up the doors to the seniors of Stoughton and complementing and adding to the programs that are already existing at the Council of Aging. We've met with the Select Board, obviously with the CPC. We've started the comprehensive permit process. We're expecting to receive from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities an approval letter any day that will allow us to submit the full comprehensive permit application to your ZBA. If we receive town meeting approval for these CPC funds in May, because we have site control, because we have a local commitment, a local funding commitment from the town, and presumably if we get zoning approval, we will be positioned to submit an application to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in October of 2024, which will start the engagement of asking the state for a lot of money. We have, as Kim alluded to, we've had extraordinary success in applying for and receiving these funds for all of the projects that we've pursued so far, whether it be in Randolph, Dorchester, or Brookline. The state really appreciates the work that we do. The state understands that there's a desperate need for affordable senior housing, but specific to Hebrew Senior Life, what they really like is the depth and breadth of services that we provide to everybody who lives in one of our communities and becomes a member of the Hebrew Senior Life family, which is above and beyond really what almost any service or housing provider is able to do. So if we're fortunate enough to be able to submit, we will not be able to submit any applications to the state without zoning approval and without a funding commitment from the town. There's three gating items to being allowed to submit an application: site control, which we have, a local funding commitment from the town, and zoning approval. Absent any of those three, the project is over. We won't be able to submit any funding applications to the state. But if we are in a place to do that, we'll do that later this fall. And ideally, we would receive a funding award for phase 1 in 2025 and begin construction in the first quarter of calendar year 2026. And then I think just finally on the last slide, we describe sort of the cumulative impact and benefits that we think would accrue to the town, which is the 200 units of affordable senior housing, 6,400 square feet of community space that will be active all the time. We hope seniors from Stoughton use it in addition to the residents who live there. We will activate the outdoor space with really enhanced landscaping and lots of programming and activities for people. It will be a passive house designed community, and we will pay significant fees and taxes to the town.
So with that, thanks, Mark.
I think that's picking you up.
With that, Mr. Chairman, we'll happily answer any questions that the members of the committee or members of the public may have.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Lauren, you have a question on this?
I have a comment.
Oh. Make sure the mic's on, light's green.
I have a comment and a couple questions. First of all, my mom was at the Hebrew rehab years ago, and it was amazing. So I just want to say that. And so if you get grants from the state, is there any way they can control the residents that go in?
So whether we get, there will be we have to adhere to federal fair housing laws. There's nothing we can do to get around that, nothing we would ever want to do to get around that. If there is a local preference, when the community opens up to take applications, people from income eligible people from Stoughton will be put in a separate basket, and they will be considered first for the units at initial occupancy. There will be an affirmative fair housing marketing plan that we must develop and get approved by the state, that the town of Stoughton will also, get to look at. And it's a very standard document, but it really does describe how we cannot in any way discriminate on the basis of any protected class whatsoever. So we are governed by federal and state laws on fair housing.
But you're guaranteeing that 70%?
No, I'm not guaranteeing. What I'm saying is we will request.
Right, but so we can't be sure that it's going to be Stoughton residents going in there?
We've never been turned down for that request. But we can't guarantee, no.
Okay. And then you've talked to other departments and things in the town. Have you gone to the fire department? Oh, you have? And
we have,
so they're comfortable with the current staff they have?
Yes, and they've also reviewed all of the geometry of how you get in and out of the proposed community so that their fire trucks can have full access, and if, God forbid, they needed to reach someone one of the upper floors, we've measured their ladder reach and how they would access someone from the upper floors.
Okay, and this is just a question I have because I'm curious. Have you guys ever thought about putting an adult daycare in Stoughton or maybe on that land, especially where the adult daycare has gone now because of the Stewart issue? That's all. Thank you.
So, and that's obviously new, the Stewart issue, but, we did, as we had the conversations with the town, think about what might make the most sense to go in our common areas and what would supplement what's already here. So adult day didn't rise to the need level, at least from the initial conversations that we had. And that would probably require more square footage than we would have available here. But I hear you and agree it's an important service, and we do have an adult day, so very important service, agree. Future, yes.
Hey, Laura, do you have a question?
I do, thank you. Excuse me. Actually, building off the previous speaker's comment, so great question about the fire department. I was actually thinking also about other like urban planning assessments being done, knowing where that location is. This is a large project with a large number of units, and there's some really wonky intersections near there where traffic can tend to be a bit of a nightmare. The schools are nearby, the train tracks are nearby. So have those assessments been done, and is the access only going to be from Canton Street, or just curious what the plan is there so we're not creating more of a traffic situation that might threaten safety?
We have completed a traffic study that we'll be including in the package that goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals, hopefully next week. The traffic study has determined that there should not be any significant impacts whatsoever on traffic. We will be looking at that intersection of sort of Canton and Simpson Street, because you're right, the school is just like a half a block away from there. And we're going to have sort of a pedestrian access coming off of Simpson Street, primarily so that residents from the adjacent Stoughton Housing Authority community, if they want to come over and participate in our programs, they'll have an easy way to do that. The entry will be, the formal entry to the community will be on Canton Street, but not right at the corner of Canton and Simpson. It will be a little bit before that if the land is on your right.
Okay.
So.
Other side of the property, thinking there's a number of kind of wetland areas there. So can you speak to, the plan to have an issue?
Sure. So you're right. Much of the land that we own is wetlands, and the way we've sited the building is that it doesn't infringe upon 100 feet of that wetlands, which is exactly why the building is located where it is, so that we would in no way impact the wetlands by 100 feet. We've done a wetlands delineation, and we'll be going in front of the Conservation Commission. It was actually supposed to tonight, but it was moved to next week. And so they'll be examining the location of all our flags, and if they have any requests for changes, we'll accommodate that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Mr. Anzavino, you have a question?
Just a couple. You said you have talked, or you will be talking to the Board of Selectmen? Or the Select Board, I correct myself, sorry.
Yes, we've been in front of the board at least once, maybe twice.
All right. Now, are you seeking to have this as a local initiative petition with their support?
You want to answer that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I know a little bit about them, not a lot, but are these going to be rental or owners?
All rental.
Rental? And do you have a projection for what that rental would be?
The amount of rent?
Yes.
So it's a very simple question. It's a little bit of a complicated answer.
Oh, I know. That's why I asked.
Because of the affordability. So many of the units are going to have attached to them a subsidy that we will request and receive from the state. That subsidy allows people to move in and pay a portion of their income for rent. So if they have no income, they pay no rent. If they have $20,000 a year of income, they'll pay plus or minus something around like a third of their income for rent. And the state will make up the difference in operating subsidy to us. So that's for some of the units. For units that don't have that deep operating subsidy attached to them, we will welcome people who might have a mobile voucher that has been issued to them by the Stoughton Housing Authority, for example, or another housing authority. They will also pay a portion of their income for rent. Then there'll be a portion of units where there's no deep subsidy attached to them, or there's not a person who has a mobile voucher. Those units will rent, and this number is going to change as inflation goes up, but around $1,600 a month.
Okay.
And that will include all their utilities, that will include all the programming that we offer.
Okay. And the, I had another one as you were talking. With the unit, and you said these will be 100%, the 200 units would all be affordable.
They'll all be deed restricted affordable units, yes.
So this is going to be quite an impact on the SHI then.
It's really going to, yeah.
I mean, that's got to give it a pretty good kick, right?
So actually, if I may, through you, Mr. Chair, that was one of the things we looked at from a CPC perspective. Our current housing inventory is somewhere in the 11.5% range. However, I can tell you that there is a large project here in Stoughton that unless an additional extension is granted, it's already had one extension, that will expire and come off our rolls in 2028. If that was to happen, and I'm not saying it is, but they've already had one extension, and it was a federal extension, which is oftentimes a last-ditch effort. If that was to come off, that would drop us to 9.9%, which is under the mandated
Under the
state,
10, yeah.
which opens us up to aggressive 40B development,
Sure.
Where we lose all control of what happens. This is, I know you've heard it's a comprehensive permit a couple of times tonight. This is a friendly 40B. It's one that the developer and the town work together to solve a problem. So I just wanted to follow up with that. Thank you.
All right. No, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Adam, you have a question?
So I have two questions. The first one was from the page 3 of the full application. It said that Hebrew Senior Life is reaching out to the town assessor to explore possibility of obtaining some measure of tax relief. What does that look like?
So we've been engaged with the interim assessor, and the calculation for our tax is consistent with residential communities in Stoughton. She provided us with a cap rate. We looked at the income that we'll receive from the property, divided by the cap rate, and then we multiplied that value by Stoughton's $13.55 rate, and that's how we landed at our tax obligation. So there's no relief in that number.
There's no relief.
You know, any dollar, we have an operating budget, right? So any dollar that is used to pay taxes is a dollar that we can't spend on resident services. You know, we can't make it up. So it is a conversation at some point we might want to have, but what we've included in our pro forma operating budget is the full tax liability that would be, we think would be calculated.
Okay. And that's the $200,000 a year that you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I may, Mr. Chair, these were questions that the CPC had asked the applicant as well. We wanted to get an understanding as to what the full investment from our town is in this project. We asked about TIFs, tax incremental, DIFs, which are developmental incrementals. And at the end of the day, they says, no, we're going to pay our full tax. We're going to pay our fees. We're really asking for your investment to be 2.3, and that really sold it for me, because now I have that hard number, 11,500 per unit. It's real clean, it's real simple. So that did come into our, into our deliberations. So thank you.
Okay. One more question. So it includes all the paperwork in there includes the income statement from 21 and 22, so you guys are losing a lot of money. So you guys had operating losses of 25 million in 21, and then 21 million in 20. You got 100 million in construction loans, so I think everything must be good, but can you give me some comfort?
I'm going to let Deb handle that one, Kim.
So you're looking at our consolidated financials for our entire organization,
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
And in there I mentioned we have 2 continuing care retirement communities.
Okay.
Those are very unique from a financing standpoint, because those are entrance fee models where residents pay us entrance fees, and we owe those entrance fees, a portion of those back to them. And so it creates a very lopsided, any financial mind that looks at our financials wonders, what's happening. But really that's the simple answer to why they look the way they do. We are a solid organization with plans to stay in business for a long time.
I think what's important for this committee to understand is, we are a nonprofit that is a service provider. We are spending tens of thousands of dollars a month on pre-development expenses from our balance sheet to pursue this project. It's very expensive.
Sure.
We have the money to do that. Obviously, we would never spend money that we don't have. but it's a significant investment for us for the size of this project. And so we are taking it very seriously. And we do need to know where the town is landing on this. Because we can't come back, we can't do it for another year. We can't just keep doing this without knowing whether the town is supportive of this. But our communities are beautiful. People who live in them feel like they are completely taken care of. This was never more evident during COVID when, we did 20,000 pounds of laundry a week. We walked dogs, we delivered 3 meals a day, we provided low-income residents with iPads and Kindles so that they could be connected. We did whatever it took to make sure that our residents were safe. We spent an extraordinary amount of money during those first months of COVID. We are grateful that we have incredible philanthropists who support us and provided us with a lot of those funds that we needed during COVID to take care of our residents. It's been estimated that 25% of our residents would be in nursing homes if it weren't for the care that we provide. And I think the singular reason why the state has supported our projects the way they have so far is that the relief that they have, that the governor's office has about how frail seniors will be taken care of once they come into the Hebrew Senior Life family is enormous. So they're constantly reaching out to us to do more and more and more, and we step up all the time to do that. So.
Okay.
Okay, Joel, you have a question?
And a couple of comments. First of all, my father was at Hebrew Rehab for his last couple of years. They took very good care of him too, and I appreciate it a lot. I'm sort of familiar with the property only because when the high school was looking to locate someplace, we actually looked at that property thinking that maybe you'd be interested, but we decided we didn't want to buy it, so we kind of left it alone. But we thought it was viable. Those are my comments. My questions are, 70% is set aside for Stoughton. Let's assume that happens. What will the role of the Stoughton Housing Authority be in that case?
So typically, it would probably only be perhaps a monitoring agent for the lottery. That would be probably the extent.
You wouldn't make the selections like you do now?
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay, so the people
through a lottery.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we will draft what's called an affirmative fair housing marketing plan, which will be reviewed by the General Counsel at the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. The purpose of that plan is to ensure that Hebrew Senior Life reach out in a non-discriminatory way to all kinds of local agencies, including the Stoughton Housing Authority, and advertise in newspapers in various localities and in all different languages, so that everybody knows about the community and has the opportunity.
All right, you're kind of moving off in a little direction.
So the Stoughton Housing, we will be, Hebrew Senior Life will be overseeing the lottery process.
That was my question,
tenant
yes.
selection.
Okay, so Hebrew Senior Life will make the determination as to who gets the units, not the Stoughton Housing Authority.
Not the Stoughton Housing Authority.
That's what I wanted to know.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you.
That's what I wanted to know.
We have no latitude. There's no judgment call on our part. It is as Kim said, it's a very prescribed and audited process.
I'm sure it is. I'm just trying to figure out who would be the ones that make the choices here. Okay, and I'm somewhat familiar with other projects and other things over the course of my career and everything, but This is a little different, only that the 2.3 million that when I see a municipality has been asked to put up some money, it's targeted at a certain thing. For example, the municipality agrees to pay for the traffic lights, traffic improvements, road improvements, utility lines coming in, and it's directed at that. But it sounds like in this case, we're basically giving Hebrew Senior Life a check for $2.3 million and say, go. Does that sound right?
I'm going to take this through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. So if we had specified exactly where we wanted the money spent, you think the motion you have before you is long, it'd be 3+ pages of that. We will enter into a grant agreement with Hebrew Senior Life. We've had these discussions at the CPC. Now, we're not going to be specifically saying you're allowed to buy 1,000 2x4s. However, we want to ensure that the money doesn't necessarily go to engineering, and the spirit of what we're looking for is that the money goes to the construction itself, not any specific part of the construction. That's for phase 1. Phase 2 is the same and in cash, although in phase 2, the cost that will be necessary for the bond on phase 1, should this pass town meeting, will be allowed to come out of that phase 2 payment.
Okay, I think I understand that. Can I assume that your total cost that you're listed here not only includes construction, but total fit out, furniture, fixtures, equipment,
Yes.
telecommunications, so forth, that's the whole, in other words, when you're done, it's a total operating structure.
Correct.
All right, and my last question is, and I'm not sure, well, I'll ask it anyway. How did you come up with the number 2.3 million? Why not 5? Why not $500,000? Where'd that come from? Hello?
No, I hear.
Is this on?
So, you know, it's interesting, and I'm going to let Deb answer, but we received 2 community housing requests this year, this project and another project we'll hear about shortly. The cost per unit is identical. It's an equation. She's going to have to tell you where the equation comes from, but it was clear to me that they have some formula to figure this out.
So it's a
Deb?
stipulated equation or a stipulated formula, or what is it?
So I think it's 2 different questions. Sort of how do we come up with the pro forma for the larger project? We have a pretty good sense of what the state will contribute.
Well, that I could actually understand because I've worked on projects like this before.
We have a pretty good sense of what the equity investors will provide.
Yeah.
And we have a fairly decent sense, although it's increasing every single day, of what it might cost to build this community. And so, and after having many conversations with the Stoughton CPC about what a reasonable and realistic request would be, and balancing that against what the gap and what the needs of the project are, we landed at the 2.3 million.
Okay, so if the Finance Committee, in its brilliance, says it really should only be 1.8 million, will that tank the project?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the, Diane?
Thank you. I can't believe after all these years that property is going to have something built on it. It's been sitting there so long. A couple of things that I couldn't find in any of the documentation here. Is there a cutoff age? And what would that be? What, 62?
60, yeah, 60.
Okay, so there would be nobody living there that would be under 62.
Someone could have a partner or a spouse who's under the age of 62, and that would be, that would be okay.
Okay.
We're also at the very, very early stages of thinking about 5 to 7 units for young adults who are aging out of foster care. We have had only some preliminary conversations about that. It's a desperate need for the state, and it would give us an opportunity to work with young adults who might be interested in learning how to work in the senior care industry. But if we were to do that, it would be a very de minimis number of those units.
Okay. Second question, 200 units. I would assume they're all one-bedroom units. And how many square feet is that in each unit?
About 630 square feet.
About 630. And I would assume the renderings from the other properties look similar to what that's going to look like as well. Okay. 45 new units in Randolph? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. How many of those units are occupied by Randolph people?
I think more than 30. I could double check the number on this, but there was a 70% local preference there. And so I think it was the 70% are rented by people from Randolph, but I can confirm that.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Elliot, you have a question on this?
Yes, I do. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Chair. I got a couple questions here, but first one I want to say is I'm glad that you have a basket here for the Stoughton residents, because I'm rapidly becoming a basket case. The senior age you just said was going to be 62. Is that really chiseled in stone, or is the state or the federal's going to be able to change that on you?
You mean make it younger or older? I mean, that has been the age limit on this type of housing for quite some time. I don't anticipate it changing in the near future.
Okay. And one other final question. Is it going to be restricted to citizens or not? In other words, we've got 75% of the people in Stoughton, will say, in the basket. Are those going to be senior citizens or just seniors? Because what I'm concerned about is this, is we've just had an influx of 650-odd families coming into Stoughton, and all of the hotels and spaces and all that stuff are filled up with those people. They're not citizens, and we're getting no revenue, tax revenue or anything else because of that. And I'm concerned that if it's not specifically for citizens, that all of a sudden we got another influx as soon as it's built and it's filled with non-citizens.
We will follow the law on occupancy. And so we can look into what it is for people, whether they need to be documented or not. But whatever the law is what we will follow with respect to all fair housing questions.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? Jonna, do you have a question?
Yeah, hello. I'm just curious, if we have such a grand need in Stoughton for senior housing, and I think it was 5,000 if I'm not mistaken, and you're only supplying 200, why would you now be talking about giving those homes to other populations beyond the senior citizens? That doesn't make sense to me.
What populations?
You mentioned that you wanted to transition children from, so why would you incorporate that? I mean, that's a worthy cause, and that's good for them to have homes. I have no problem with that. But we're talking specifically about senior housing. We don't even have enough. 5,000 to 200 is really not really covering the need. And then you're going to take that and divide it even further? I don't understand.
So we've, as Deb mentioned, we've only had some preliminary conversations about whether that even makes sense. There are a lot of things about it that we like. We do a lot of multi-generational programming. We also are very invested, as I mentioned earlier, in workforce and workforce development, and believe that there are some great opportunities and synergies there. If we were to do that, it would be a very small number of units. That is, in the single digits of a couple, 1, 2, 5, small number of units. But again, in the 200-unit community, our focus is on senior housing, and that is the bulk of what we're looking at there.
Okay, I just don't understand why that's even a consideration, because it should just be seniors. I'm not clear. Why are you encompassing other age groups?
It's a good question. We'll re-examine this, but we know that even the seniors like to have younger people around them. It was really a programming discussion that we've been having. But you make a good point. So
Thank you.
Let us re-examine that.
Thank you. And then I'm just curious, referring back to Elliot's question, are we going to have to potentially worry that this is going to be filled up with illegals?
Yes.
I choose not to comment on that right now.
Well, I'm asking a question so we could know if we should vote on this. And
I don't know what an illegal is.
an illegal is a person that comes into this
Stated
country
you'd be
that doesn't
following-
belong here.
Was it stated you'd be following all laws?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions or comments? Mr. Anzavino, you have a question on this?
If I could, just a follow-up. You had mentioned maybe having solar panels or whatever, but you would be fossil-free, fossil fuel-free. So I'd like you to expand on that a little as far as what do you do for those services if you're completely fossil-free? How do you provide those utilities and so forth?
We might have to do domestic hot water with gas, but everything else would be electric.
Oh, okay. Well, I was kind of confused because electric, a lot of electric is from fossil, so that's why I was wondering. I just wanted to be clear what you were looking at, that's all. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? Dave, you have a question? Oh, Lauren? Lauren, you have a question?
Yeah, it's just a quick question.
Mic on, green.
Yes, it's on. Can you hear me? So in Stoughton, there's a lot of seniors who, for whatever reason, are taking care of their grandchildren because their parents can't take care of them for whatever reason. What happens in that situation? Would the kids go with senior?
Well, right now, we're assuming all one-bedroom units, so I don't know. It's a really good question. In our community in Dorchester, we have a couple of two-bedroom units where that exact dynamic is happening. But right now, we're programming 200 one-bedroom units, so it would be difficult for just the architecture of the unit wouldn't really fit for someone who's taking care of a child.
Okay, Dave, you had a question on this?
Yeah, thank you, Vaughn, through you. First of all, I'll just make the comment. I think that this is an organization that if any organization was to do a project that filled a need as great as this, I think that Hebrew Life is terrific. I have no problems with the project and the organization that's working it. So putting all that aside, I just have questions on the money side. Just because I'm ignorant and I see these projects, and a lot of cases I'm very ignorant about things, and that's why I'm glad I'm on the Finance Committee. The aspect of when you see a public project, it's clear that you're going to use prevailing wage, it's taxpayer money, it's going to be, run by, the professionals that work in public projects and things like that. But here's a case in which you have a private organization and they go out and they get public money, and prevailing wage it seems fuzzy to me as to whether or not you're under the demands of that or not. What is the rule of that? How does that work?
So we are a private organization that will be using public funds. We will be, every week, we will have an owner, architect, contractor meeting. Those meeting minutes are shared with public employees who are going to be overseeing every penny that we spend. Every time we submit a requisition, it's going to be reviewed by the state to make sure that we're spending the money, that we're paying the correct wages and spending the money appropriately. At the end of the project, we'll have to do what's called a cost certification that is an audit that CPAs will have to do for us, and gets reviewed. Every single line of the development budget will be reviewed carefully against all of the invoices and all of the requisitions. So it's a very regulated, highly reviewed process, and it happens sort of every day of the construction project.
So you realize the same kind of costs that a public-funded, public kind of, where the people who are actually running the project, instead of a municipality, a private organization will find the same costs as a municipality?
We are not held, because we're a private organization, we're not held to the exact same procurement requirements that the public sector. So we can procure a general contractor through a competitive bid process. They in turn can pick their subs in a way that works best for them. They don't have to do the 30B procurement where they keep having to procure down the line for every one of their subs.
Yeah, you know why I'm asking. It's purely because, if you stayed private as the source, are you saving 50 million, how many millions of dollars do you save by not using public money?
Right, it's more efficient because of the procurement, where we have somewhat of a relaxed procurement process. And so through that efficiency, we can move faster, and that's where the cost savings comes from.
Okay, thank you for that. And through you, Vaughn, I still have a couple more questions, if that's okay. The question came up around the local funding, and CPA is one local source, clearly. Is it the only source? Like, if you didn't have a CPA in Stoughton, we wouldn't have you in front of us right now? Like, is that the only way in which towns are eligible to have a Hebrew Life project?
No, many towns have affordable housing trust funds and other line items in their operating budget to support the development of affordable housing.
Okay. And a previous speaker covered one of my questions about that, which was, how did you come up with a number? Like, how does it impact the project? Like, do you literally lose units, based on the amount of dollars you get from us? Like, how does it impact? Like, if we only gave you $2 million, does that $300,000 cost us 2 units? Like, is there an equation like that out there?
There's not an equation like that out there. If we're not able to secure the funding that we need collectively, whether from the town or the state or equity investors, what we need to look at is the project as a whole. So it's not just about like lopping off a couple of units because we didn't get this money or that money. It's sort of, how do can we restructure the project so that it continues to be financially feasible? And so I don't know. If you opt to either provide no money or a less amount, I don't actually, as I sit here right now, I don't know what we would do and whether we could proceed.
Okay, that's a fair answer. I also am going to harken back to a previous speaker much earlier.
Could I interrupt you for 1 minute?
Sure.
I just want to follow up a little bit with that through you, Mr. Chair. The CPC committed $2.3 million for 200 units, which in essence equals 11,500. If Hebrew Senior Life wasn't to achieve that, or say finance recommended and town meeting approved a lower amount, then it wouldn't just be Hebrew Senior Life that would have to look at this project and see if it was still viable for them. We would have to look at this and see if it was viable as well from a CPC perspective. So we're not just throwing Hebrew Senior Life into the dark on this. In reality, what we have approved would stop. And
okay,
they could reapply,
so, yeah.
But it's basically the end of the project
Fair
from
enough.
our end.
Yeah, thank you.
And it sounds more or less like it is from theirs too. Not that something wouldn't happen, but.
Okay, back to my last question was hearkening back to an earlier previous speaker around checking with the fire department. I think one of the things that you hear over and over about the 70%, the 70%, the 70%, it seems like a good number. I mean, you can't go to 100%. It's very difficult to imagine because of the fair housing. The problem comes in if it erodes below 70, is the demands that it does put on public safety, because if we're servicing the residents that we have already in town, that's one thing, but if we increase the population and it puts greater demands on the town's resources, then obviously it has an impact. So I'm happy at 70, I think. I feel confident that 70 is a reasonable number, but I wouldn't want to see it erode, so I'd be like, sort of holding my breath and hitting the yes button and being like, I sure hope they get to 70. It would be one of those kind of things. So I just wanted to make sure that the sensitivity around that number isn't in a vacuum, like, oh, gee, they're just stubborn about 70. Well, it has an impact, So that's my last comment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other questions or comments from the committee on Article 37? Okay, no more questions from the committee. Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support Funds, $2.3 million. Any questions or comments from the public? Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support Funds, $2.3 million. Please step forward and identify yourself for the record.
First of all, I want to thank you people. I am kind of in favor of this project, but I'm going to ask a question. You're not going to like what I'm going to ask, but I'll ask that later. I have other questions first. First of all, this basket you have for
Could you please identify yourself for the record?
Oh, I'm
Get the
sorry.
mic nice and close. That way everyone at home knows who you
Peter
are. And they can hear your
Ventresco,
darling voice.
Precinct 8, 587 Canton Street. All right, this basket you have for Stoughton residents, that's going to have a short window of time, right? It ain't going to go like a year or better. So when it opens up, it has to be done within this, like the first year or first 6 months for Stoughton residents.
That's upon opening, so that applies to the opening, the first
First
move-ins
opening.
that happen.
So a year later, you mentioned people are going to sell their homes and move in. So after a year, if I was to sell my house, I wouldn't be able to move in. Or if I could, you're going to have some kind of a means test, I think, as far as, like you mentioned, the elderly are going to sell their homes so the young people can move into town. But if you sell your house for $500 to $1 million, then what's that rent going to be?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of questions there. The local preference is at initial occupancy, which is going to take the amount of time that it takes. I don't mean to be turning my back. I don't know how you want me to look. Is this okay?
That's all right. That's
Okay.
Be comfortable.
You're doing great.
Okay. So it's going to take whatever amount of time it takes. We have no idea if people from Stoughton are going to sell their homes. That might happen, and that's okay. Your annual income, not your assets, but your annual income needs to be at or below a certain area median income at that time. If you sell your house for whatever, we will impute a certain percent of that income, of that asset as your income, and that will get added to your annual income. So it's a very formulaic process. And again, we have no agency in this. It is a formula that is derived from the funding sources, and we have a lot of residents in our communities who have sold homes and their incomes are still low enough that they're allowed to move in. And again, the rent is going to be at most a plus or minus, $1,600 a month.
If I could just add to Deb's comment before you can hear. So, Peter, it's not unlike what we do with the Housing Authority. Okay. It's not unlike what we do with the Housing Authority. It's a two-part process. The first part being eligibility. Person cannot make over a certain amount of money. Then, as Deb said earlier, based on what they make, that's how their rent is calculated.
All right, so what is the most a person can make?
So their income is going to be around $62,000 a year. And if that is your income, and again, these are not precise numbers and the numbers change annually. If that is your income, you would pay $1,600 a month for rent.
Okay. All right, I'm going to touch on a few questions, add on to a few questions some of these board members asked before. One about the illegals moving in, would they have preference? I don't think you can keep them out because we are a right to shelter state, so you cannot deny them, whether they're citizens or not. At least that's my opinion.
We will obey the law.
So they're in there. So that answers your question. And, okay, the Stoughton Housing Authority that Mr. Crimmins is well aware on, the government years back made them take people that are underage that have either liquor or drug problems. So this could happen to your place too?
We have a senior set aside, so we won't be taking people under the age of 62.
Yeah, but the government, Stoughton, let me elaborate a little bit more. Stoughton Housing Authority, when it started out, was the same thing for the elderly, but then the government years back said that you have to take these people in. So could that happen
We
here?
follow all fair housing laws and regulations in terms of our tenant selection policies. That's the answer.
Okay.
So then what you're saying, they could fall in there?
It's 62 and older.
Yeah, but if you're going to follow the federal laws, they're saying you have to take these people that have drug problems or alcohol.
I'm not aware of a federal law that requires anybody to take people.
Well, I think Mr. Crimmins can answer that better than anybody.
The reference to the Housing Authority is a different statutory scheme that we fall under, where our elderly complexes are also eligible for a certain percentage of non-elderly disabled, and they have to meet that criteria of non-elderly disabled. But that's a different criteria than what we would be under here.
All right. I'm bringing that up because I know a lot of elderly, they're afraid because of these people that are in there with them. Okay, the other question I have, after 20 or 30 years, you people decide to sell the property. Now it's another developer takes it over, then this 55 and over could go out the window, right? And they can bring in people of all ages.
If this is deed restricted, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if this is deed restricted,
So it's going to be restricted?
In perpetuity.
Okay.
In perpetuity.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Crimmins.
Now, the other problem I have is that I said I had a question, you wouldn't want to do this, but Lipsky's farm, that was never a swamp when I was a kid, even when I was a young adult. That was a working dairy farm when I was a kid. In the early 40s, Mr. Lipsky decided to get out of the dairy business, and he auctioned off all his cows. Then a few years later, he decided to raise.
Is this a question or comment regarding
Well, I'm
the
getting to the
project?
comment what I want to see done with this property.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not
Okay.
having a
All right,
trip down memory lane.
Mr. Lipsky, for years, he dredged a little brook through the property. He had a little wooden bridge for the cows to get from one half of the property to the other, and for his tractor to get across to mow the hay fields, to bale the hay. So it was a working farm. Even up until the early 70s, the wettest part of that property was the northwest corner, which is down near the gas station. That was wet, and it dried up late in the spring. But they even planted corn there, human corn for human consumption.
Is
So
this,
it was
is
a
this
working
at
dairy
all
farm.
connected to the article, Mr.
Just let
Ventresca?
me finish, please. Okay, so what I'm getting at is, I would like to see that land restored back to what it was before. Land, usable land, not a swamp. The reason why it turned out to a swamp, because the land was neglected. In the back of your property is the brook called Steep Hill Brook. And a lot of times, the big storms, like all brooks and rivers, over time, they fill up and the elevation of the bottom of the river, the brook, rises. So that's what happened there. So if you go there when the water's, after it rains, or even normal days, the elevation of the water in the brook is the same elevation as the water in the field. So if that brook was dredged down a little bit, that would drain that piece of property and make it usable land. And that's what I would like to see, that land restored. And it wouldn't cost that much. All you need is a dozer once it dries up to clean up all that brush, and it's rich, fertile soil. You can have beautiful grass there, walking trails and benches, And that's what I would like to see there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Ventresco. Any other questions or comments from the public on Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support Funds, $2.3 million? Please step forward and identify yourself for the record. Please try to keep the questions or comments somewhat relevant to Article 37. Thank you.
What you guys don't know. I'll be very brief. Good evening. My name is James Rush. I'm a member of the fire department for 28 years. I've also worked as an EMT part-time for 35 years. I'm familiar with their buildings, Hebrew Senior Life, 1200 Center, Newbridge on the Charles. But I will say this, I do the inspections of all the senior housing buildings. Capon Street is 68 units, and the Civic Court is probably about the same, and Britton Ave is about the same. Adding 200 units is going to be an impact on the ambulance service to the town of Stoughton. There's no denying that. I mean, this is the population of people who use the ambulance a lot. This is going to be an impact on the ambulance. There's no doubt about that. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Hang on a minute. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank the public before you jump in, but thank you.
Yeah, I have a question to the previous speaker. Yeah, I was bringing that up because I was curious. If you already have the same seniors in the 70%, and it's highly concentrated into one structure on Canton Street, how does that impact you? Are you really talking about the 30%? Are you saying because Stoughton residents who are concentrated into one building, that's where the impact? I'm trying to understand where the impact is. Is it the 30% or is it the concentration of seniors in one building?
The 30%. I understand them.
You know what I mean?
From Washington Street to Canton Street, they're still the same people. I understand
Yeah.
what you're saying. But yeah, the other 30%, I mean,
That's what you're concerned with, is the 30%.
the totality of it, I suppose.
Okay, that was my question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lurie. Any other questions or comments from the public? Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support Funds, $2.3 million. Lisa, did you have a question on this?
Yes, I initially was in favor of this project until I heard the hesitation of following all the laws. From what I can see that's happening in this state, we'll just keep it to the state, which will affect this town, as you just said, is the shelter-in-place scenario was meant to take care of our veterans and our homeless, and it has turned into something else, and that's a deep concern to me.
This is Article 37. Is this question or comment related? Mr. Lurie, please wait a minute. Is this related to Article 37?
Yes, because you can't guarantee me that the purpose, we had hotels in this town and they have changed their use, so we are being presented with this project to be for seniors, which I deeply want to see happen, but the use could change, and that's of a deep concern. So
Mr. Zamanian,
that directly relates to the article, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Zamanian, is this project for a hotel?
No, it is not. It is specifically for senior housing, age 62 and above.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Lisa?
No, because you seem to have missed the point that I wasn't saying it was a hotel. They're telling us it's supposed to be for senior housing, and as we have seen in other buildings of this town, the use has changed, and that's the concern.
Mr. Zamanian, is this age restriction a deed restriction?
Yes, perpetually deed restricted.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lurie, did you have a follow-up to this?
I do have a follow-up. First of all, nobody knows anything about the demographics of the people that are in on the shelter. So they could be over 62. There could be 50% of the people who are in these places that are migrant shelters could be eligible age-wise for the restrictions that were just shared. So I don't think that that's necessarily, throwing that objection away. I think that objection still lives. But I do have a question that might answer this, which is timing. We were told that, and I think there's a bill at the state level talking about putting an 18-month limit on the whole problem with migrants. I don't know how they're going to work that out. I really don't. Some people, I guess, if they're pregnant, they get to stay longer, whatever. But What is the time frame for this? When do you, let's say, forget about just even the construction, but going into like the application process, what is the first month that you would actually, I want to put a marker down as to when this whole problem that, when this whole thing blows over, that it has to blow over by a date certain in order to avoid the problems we just heard. What is the date that we need to be concerned about?
Mr. Chair, can I ask a clarification question to the speaker?
Yes, that would be great.
Are you
Let's
asking when Hebrew Senior Life intends on opening the lottery?
Yes.
Okay. Your anticipated construction date, why don't you go ahead and...
If I remember correctly, it was beginning of 2026.
I believe that's correct.
I was paying attention during that part. Thank you, though.
So I think construction will start at the beginning of 2026. It's likely for each phase going to be a 20-month construction process. So it's probably going to be into 2027 before we would activate the affirmative fair housing marketing plan.
Oh, so there's new information that we haven't heard yet. Thank you for that.
How was that?
Thank you. 2027. Thank you.
It says fall of 27.
Thank you.
Did you read the paperwork, Mr. Lurie?
No.
With all due respect, we get a lot of paperwork. With all due respect, we get a lot of paperwork, and we.
But it's page 14.
Well,
Page 14. Thank you.
No crosstalk. We're not going to have a bunch of cross debate on this.
Of which document?
What was the question?
I don't see a document with page.
Mr. Lurie, has your question been answered on this?
You're talking about the CPA application, obviously, because it's not in a printed document. Where's this document you're reading? Because I don't have it.
We are not going to have a bunch of crosstalk.
It's not crosstalk. Through you, Vaughn, what document is it on that I should be reading?
The CPA application.
I don't have a printout of that.
So it's page 14.
Well, the
has
previous
timeline.
speaker has a document that I don't have, so.
Thank you, Adam. Adam, you have this in writing, and so do probably many of the members here of the Finance Committee. Thank you for the clarity. What page is that? 14. Thank you. Okay. Everybody's on page 14 now? Okay, thank you very much. You're saying this will be toward the end of 2027?
Middle of 2027.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Article 37, Hebrew Senior Life Affordable Senior Housing Project Support Funds, $2.3 million. Okay, no more questions from the public on this? Any questions, comments from the public on this? Article 37? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. Have a wonderful evening. Next item on the agenda, Article 38, renovation of town-owned barn on West Street, $230,000.
Mr. Chairman, could we take a 5-minute break for a minute? Hey, it's 20 past 9, so.
Yeah, we'll 5-minute recess. You all. And we are returning from our 5-minute recess. That's pretty close to 5 minutes. We're good. We're good. We're good on that. Yes, we're fine on that. Yes, we have an abundance. Let's take some of this out of order. I'm going to jump down to Article 43. Bird Street Conservation Area entryway improvements, $110,000.
Reschedule his meeting to be here tonight.
Oh, that's a good point. Just be patient. Ready to start, Mr. Chair?
43 is on page 37.
Yes, Article 43, page 37.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Article 43 is the Bird Street Conservation Area entry improvements. This was brought to us by the Conservation Commission. Our program administrator determined that this does indeed meet the requirements of the Community Preservation Act. We are requesting $110,000, and on January 3rd, 2024, under an urgent review, we voted 8-0 to approve these funds. I'm going to turn it over at this point to Jerry McDonald, Chairman of the Conservation Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Good evening, and thank you. Thanks, Mark. Just a little background. First, Jerry McDonald, Chairman of the Conservation Commission, Precinct 4, Town Meeting Rep. This article is tied to a prior article in Town Meeting and a trail grant that the state gave us to do some work out there. FinCom supported a corresponding article that was required in advance of the trail grant, because there's a 20% funding requirement from the state. So we did a CPC article for that, and we got CPC approval for that article, and we got FinCom approval for that article. We got town meeting approval for that article. We proceeded with the trail grant. The trail grant was submitted by Mark Tisdale, town engineer, in conjunction with our Conservation Commission and conservation agent. And we were successful getting the trail grant. Subsequently, a lot of the work on the trail grants have been done, which was taking care of a lot of water issues out there that residents had complained about. And the residents I've talked to love the work that's been done. The final piece of the trail grant is a small parking lot at the end of Bird Street, and we discussed that internally. We also discussed it with neighbors in the area, and it was decided that the trail grant didn't include a gate system, and the parking lot and the entranceway were going to be open. And we thought that's not necessarily good. So we voted to pursue this gate, which will be like the Glen Echo gate, open in the morning, close at night, and electronic gate. And that's designed to just open the parking lot when it's appropriate and close it when it's not. There's a concern about dumping now that we have the new trash ordinance coming. There was a concern on the commission's part that, with tighter control over trash, people might think, oh, that's a great place to drop a mattress when nobody's looking. So we are pursuing it for just security cases, and we have a good feel for the expense because it was done at Glen Echo. So we're really following the same cost structure. It's in the application that we did for the gate and the marking. We're going to do a little landscaping to clean that area up, potentially rehabilitate the sign that was there for years and has fallen into disrepair. So it's really just to kind of ride on top of the trail grant money to make it a little bit more secure after hours. We have support from police, fire, and DPW on this, and I'm here tonight to look for your support.
All right, thank you very much for that. We have any questions or comments from the committee? Article 43, Bird Street Conservation Area Entryway Improvements. Mr. Elliott Hansen.
Thank you. How are the monitoring cameras and the electronic gate? Who's going to be monitoring the monitoring cameras?
I believe the tapes go to the police department.
I'm sorry?
The tapes go to the police department. And if you're stuck inside the gate, you have to call a number which is at the police department to let you out.
Will there be a telephone at the gate?
There's a call box, yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments? Lisa, you have a question on this?
No, just a comment. I think this is a wonderful project, and that entryway is in sore need of repair, and it ties in well with the trails. I think this is a great article.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 43, Bird Street Conservation Area Entryway Improvements for $110,000. Hearing none. Any other questions or any questions or comments from the public on Article 43, Bird Street Conservation Area Entryway Improvements, $110,000? Please step forward and identify yourself for the record. Please keep your comments or questions relative to the article.
Peter Ventresco, 587 Canton Street. The question, just to this article, with all these CPA articles, how much revenue, percentage of revenue do we get back from the state?
20%.
26?
20%.
20%.
Thank you, Cynthia. I believe that this was
If
all...
I could clarify, Mr. Chair.
That would be great, thank you.
The state match varies from year to year.
Yeah.
We have had rates upwards of 34%. This year, the upcoming fiscal 2025, we are being cautioned by the coalition that due to a slowdown in sales, which is where we get our money from the Registry of Deeds, we should anticipate a contribution of approximately 20%.
All right, great, thank you. But please keep your questions and comments relative to this article.
Well, it's to all these CPC funds, because when it started out, it was supposed to be 100% matching funds. And now we're down to 20. And we keep throwing money out, and we don't get money to
It was
cover
never
these
100%.
costs. What's going to happen?
It was not 100%.
If I could address that, Mr.
That would
Chair.
be
As a matter
great,
of
thank
fact,
you.
Barry, you want to touch on that?
Yes.
This was all really covered in
Yeah,
Article
since Stoughton
18.
has had the
18.
CPA,
This was all
it's never
covered.
been 100%, and that was never any promise that was ever made.
The contribution from the state depends on how many towns and municipalities are involved in it. The monies come directly from the Registry of Deeds. The state has traditionally supplemented this on their supplemental budget in the fall, but there's certainly no guarantees. We are guaranteed whatever monies is available at the Registry of Deeds will be split amongst the communities that have the CPA.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions or comments from the public? Article 43, please step forward, identify yourself for the record. Please keep questions and comments relative to this article.
Good evening. My name is Brian Del Tufo. I live at 78. My name is Brian Del Tufo. I live at 78 Bird Street. Can you hear? Yeah. I live at 78 Bird Street. I'm in favor of the gate. I moved to Bird Street in 2017. Nice, quiet street. I have 3 small children. They play in the neighborhood, play in the street. I have concerns with it becoming a dumping ground. The parking lot design is a little out of sight, out of mind, if you will. So if people could not park there overnight, that would greatly make me feel better and my family feel better about being safe and secure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Please step forward, identify yourself for the record.
Good evening. Gerard Shockley, Precinct 4, Marin Ave. I am also in favor of the article being presented for the additional funds for the gate. Lifelong resident of Stoughton, moved into Marin Ave area in 2002. I'm up in the Bird Street Conservation area at least 3 times a week. And for the reasons already mentioned, I think it's a good idea to control the element and have a gate in place, and I'm in favor. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any other questions or comments from the public? Article 43, Bird Street Conservation Area, entryway improvements, $110,000. Hearing none. Next item on the agenda, we will jump over to Article...
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank you very
night.
much for your presentation. You did an excellent
Thank you,
job.
Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman McDonald. We always seem to really like their articles, though, anyway. Concom always has great articles, seriously.
Because we pay cash for them.
You didn't go to the...
Because they don't ask too much.
Cash, I like the
Cash.
Yeah, I know you like the cash.
We're going to go to Article 38, renovation of town-owned barn on West Street, $230,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Article 38, just for the record, meets the CPA requirement under historical preservation. The request for $230,000 is a follow-up article to the article we presented at town meeting that requested, and we received $7,500 to take a look at the barn and figure out what was wrong with it, and get furthermore cost estimates, hard cost estimates as to what it would cost to make some repairs to this building. On December 6, 2023, the CPC voted 8-0 to approve this article as a cash expenditure. With that said, I'll turn it over to Dwight so he can briefly go through everything.
Yes, I'll try not to take up much of your time. We've been over before how this was, the older part of the barn was built by Jesse Gay in 1808. Hurley's added on to it in 1932, full-fledged dairy farm at that point, one of 3 or 4 big ones on West Street. McNamara's bought it in the 1950s and had been in the McNamara ownership until the town bought it a couple decades ago. It was a great old barn. The left-hand side of it is very solid. The right-hand side, having been built in 1808, has some structural issues inside. I know people have explored the option of community gardening up there, and that this might be a place for community gardens to have their headquarters. I'm leaning myself more toward, should the barn be saved, and I hope it will be, a farm, part of it being a farm museum, because Stoughton has a rich farm history. Mr. Ventresco mentioned part of it, Lipsky Field, which, by the way, were victory gardens in World War I, even before the farmer he mentioned. So, and we have old machinery that's accumulated that we could put in there and put together a educational thing that shows students and other people of Stoughton's dairy past, because that was the dairy section of town. And if we don't do something with the barn, it's going to fall in. So that's kind of the bottom line here, and I'll be glad to take a shot at any questions.
And if I may just follow up briefly, we have been in contact with the Select Board. We have a foundational proposal to the town as to the uses of this building, which would likely be multiple or multifaceted. We have yet to ascertain a meeting with the Select Board, but we're still waiting for that, and I can provide the foundational, although if I'm being frank, it will be short on details, because we need to have an understanding from the town's perspective how they would see this property used. The barn itself is owned by the Select Board of the town. The property behind it, which we want to use for agricultural purposes, is controlled by the Conservation Commission, just for some reference points there.
And it is an entrance to trails that go through the field, so there's actually parking behind this barn because it's blacktop. So it's a potential, another entrance where people can park to get into the Bird Street trails.
If cleaned up.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. Any questions, comments from the committee? Article 38, renovation of town-owned barn on West Street for $230,000. Okay, hearing none. Any questions or comments from the public? Article 38, renovation of town-owned barn on West Street, $230,000. Please step forward, identify yourself for the record, and keep questions and comments relative to Article 38.
Peter Ventresco, 587 Canton Street, Precinct 8. I'm going to take my glasses off. I'm against this article. I was against it the last time they brought it here, but I think they shortened the barn down quite a bit. Am I right?
Pardon?
You shortened the barn up quite a bit?
Shutting it up?
Shortened it up.
Oh, yeah, we're going to take off that milk room, I think.
Okay.
It's fallen in.
All right. I see no value in this barn whatsoever. And they keep mentioning gardens. I mean, we had these gardens up at Cape and Reynolds, and it only lasted a few years, and that just fell apart. Nobody was interested anymore. So I don't see why, if it flunked at Cape and Reynolds, which is a historic farm, why is this one going to be such a success? And what use is the barn going to be for these gardens, if you do have the gardens there? Give me an answer.
Would you like to answer?
Sure.
All right, great, thank you.
The barn could be used for multiple purposes. For the record, the Cape and Reynolds project is still actually within construction. Has not been completed as of yet, much to my chagrin, mind you. but we hope to have that constructed this summer and be at least available by the fall, along with a dog park.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Maybe I'll see you up there with your dog, but
I kind of doubt that, but
please, if you dare.
I have kind of a question regarding a public comment. What would it cost to completely take down the barn?
I can't give you an accurate estimate. I can only give you a sense from other towns what buildings like this have cost. Lakeville recently, within the last few years, spent almost $600,000 to have a similar structure removed and disposed of.
All right, great, thank you. Okay.
Just briefly, as a point of information,
Great, thanks.
the Cape and Reynolds project, including the community gardens and the dog park, are going out to bid, I believe, later this month.
There you go.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
I would want to see a professional bid come in to take that barn down for $600,000 because I am not buying. I'm not buying.
I was just asking.
And
for
the last
a
time
rough question.
they brought this barn up, they were going to rent it out to farmers, and the farmers could leave their farm equipment there. That's not how it works. Farmers don't leave equipment on different fields. They take it back to the main farm, and then they move it to different plots of land as they need it. There's not that kind of money for them to have tractors here, tractors there. It doesn't work out that way. So I'm against this. I should think the bond should come down, and they can do whatever they want with the land. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your comments. Any other questions? Please step forward, identify yourself for the record.
If I may sit down.
Yes, sir.
Jerry McDonald, Chairman of the Conservation Commission, Precinct 4 Town Meeting Rep. This issue has come before the Conservation Commission twice, I believe, and the Conservation Commission voted officially to endorse the idea of agriculture on the fields that are immediately behind the property that is under the control of the Select Board. The fields that are immediately behind that 2-acre parcel are about, it's debatable, but 8 to 15 acres of open fields that exist in addition to the 800 acres of woods that is the Bird Street Conservation Land. And the Conservation Commission has voted to endorse an agricultural use. We haven't seen a plan just yet. We haven't developed a plan just yet, but part of that plan is potentially to offer a lease or a license to use 10 acres of fields for farming, and have potential access and use of the barn as part of that lease. But the complicating factor is the Select Board owns and controls the 2.5 acres at the street. The conservation property is behind it in that case. It comes out to the street at the corner of West Street and a couple other spots, but at that particular location, it's the Select Board that controls the access in the barn. So we really don't have a direct say in the use of the barn, but we're very supportive of restoring the barn or maintaining the barn and being cooperative with any agricultural use, whether that's educational, victory gardens, or leasing the land to a farmer who wants to use it for additional field space. So I just wanted to go on record that the conservation is supporting the concept.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman McDonald.
If there's any questions of the Conservation Commission, I'd be happy to answer them.
Not that I'm aware of. Okay, any other questions, comments?
No.
No what? You don't have any more questions or comments?
Yes, I do.
Then the answer would be yes. Okay, any other questions, comments from the public? Article 38, please identify yourself for the record.
Peter Ventrusco, 587 Canton Street, Precinct 8. These people have a terrible record for restoring bonds. If you take the bond they have there at Cape and Reynolds, you go take a quick look at that. It's in deplorable condition. So I hate to see this bond end up being the same way. And no farmer's going to want, like I mentioned before, have any need for that.
You're right, you did mention it before.
But the land, yeah, rent it out and let them use the land, because the land, if the hay fields have to be mowed, because if they're not, they go back to nature.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public? Article 38, renovation of town-owned barn on West Street, $230,000. Hearing none. Next item on the agenda.
I have my hand up. Can I be recognized?
Yeah, I
Or
already
should
called for questions and comments from the committee, and you didn't raise your hand, but yeah, if you have a question or comment.
I decided to make a comment.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I've lived in town for 33 years, and the only time I ever go through that part of Stoughton is to go to Ames Pond, pretty much, unless I'm trying to get to Easton. But I never have seen this piece of land. I've never seen a barn. I don't know how people will even take interest in going to see this thing because there's a remodeled barn. I don't get it. I mean, when I saw this article before, the only way I was in favor of it is if they relocated the barn so we'd have like a museum of deplorable barns up on the north side of Stoughton instead of on the west. That was how I looked at it, because then we'd have better use of Cape and Reynolds. Maybe we'd draw people into there. But people do go by Cape and Reynolds a lot more often than they go through that part of Stoughton. So I don't know how many people are really going to take time out of their day to go visit this barn.
Did you see the front page of the community calendar 2 years ago? The main picture on the community calendar?
I can't recollect it. But
barn with girls and bicycles out in front of it?
I can't recollect. So you're saying back in the day it was a popular spot to go? Is that?
I think he said 2 years ago.
That's your point. How many years ago?
I think he said 2.
2 years ago there was
on the community calendar there was a picture.
A recent picture.
No, it was when if you read the article, there's quite a bit of detail in there, but
I didn't read
may not bore you with it now. I think part of what this project will do will clear the vegetation from around the barn. So the reason you haven't noticed it, there's a ton of bittersweet, a lot of other brush. The barn's fairly close to the road, but you don't see it because there's a lot of brush in front of it. So if we get it cleared out, you will notice it when you go by.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public on this? Okay. Thank you. We will go to the next item on the agenda. We will go to historic signage, Article 39, Group 2, historical signage, $17,000.
Page 33.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Article 39 was the historic site signs. This is the second group of signage we're requesting funding for. The request is for $17,000. This does qualify under the Community Preservation Act under historical preservation. On December 6th, 2023, the committee voted 8-0 to recommend funding to town meeting as a cash article. I'm going to turn this over to Dwight, who I believe has a fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I think we've already have 20 signs up, one of which is right out in front of Town Hall here, and they've been very well received, and they're hopefully attractive little pieces of town history put at 20 places. This will be 15 more, one at the railroad station, one at Freeman Street, all of the cemeteries that don't have them yet. And there's a list that I think that you have here. So 15 more signs, which will be the good news. The bad news for me is that I will have a fair amount of work to do to put these things together, but I don't charge by the hour, so it's my responsibility. And should we get our $17,000, I hope to have those signs in the ground in 2 years.
Well, thank you very much for that, and thanks for putting the signs together. Questions or comments from the committee? Article 39, historic signage, Group 2, $17,000. Hearing none. You have a question, Jonna? All right, Jonna.
I'm just a little confused. I mean, I don't seem to have a problem with it. I mean, we should preserve, historical things, but I'm just not clear on what kind of a sign it is. Could you just elaborate a little, please?
Well, there's one in front of the Lucius Club. There's one right in front of Town Hall here by the flagpole. It's about 2 feet by 3 feet, and it has pictures. The one out in front here has a picture of the horse pulling the fire wagon behind this building. So each sign has 3 or 4 relevant pictures or maps that go with the location. And we have 20 of them up, but the closest one is right outside.
I think there's a picture of a sign in the.
What are they made out of? Oh.
Yeah, there's a picture in the
When we originally designed
materials that were
Thank you.
distributed.
we were going to have a plastic cover on them, but it turned out the plastic cover gathered more stuff underneath it, so it's actually a little cheaper to just have the sort of baked enamel top.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 39, Historic Signage Group 2, $17,000. Hearing none. Any questions, comments from the public? Article 39, Historic Signage Group 2, $17,000. Please identify yourself for the record, Cynthia Walsh.
Ditto, 1096 Park Street. And I'm also a member of the 300th anniversary of Stoughton, which is conveniently 2 years from now. And it would be very good if the Historical Commission would create a map of all of these signs so that families might spend a Saturday or a Sunday going from sign to sign in their neighborhood and further out and learn a little bit more about Stoughton history. So I support the article.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think that's a nice idea.
And I hope by the time of the 300th, we can have a bus tour that takes us around and visits. Maybe not all the signs, but most of them.
Any other questions, comments from the public? Article 39, Historic Signage Group 2, $17,000. Hearing none. Next item on the agenda, we will go to, let's go to renovation of Marks Field construction phase, $518,000.
I'm sorry, which one are we?
Article 41.
41 on page
Renovation
36.
of Marks Field.
41. Okay, Article 41 is a follow-up article from a design article that was approved last year at town meeting. This is for the construction phase of that original article. The original, I would like to make note that the original request on this was for $1.418 million. We worked with Mike Tupin from Stolax and Matt Cashone at Recreation to work with the design folks to generate a more feasible project that was far less expensive for the town and that would still, in fact, solve the needs of the Stolax and the town's needs for this field. This is supported by Recreation, as this is not a usable field for Recreation, and Matt Cashone is looking for space that he can utilize for many of the different programs he runs here in the town. Simply doesn't have enough room. So this field will have multi-purposes. Stolax does have a license agreement for a short period of time during their season, but this will also be utilized by a number of different town programs sponsored by the Recreation Department. Ultimately, we approved $518,000 in cash on December 6, 2023, by a vote of 8-0. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mike and everybody at Stolax. And this does meet the requirements of under Recreation at the CPA. So,
thank you very much.
What about that? Mike?
Thank you. Mike Tupin, 12 Atherton Street. I'm president of Stoughton Youth Lacrosse. We are seeking these funds to build an athletic field. We want to remove the remnants of the old softball field, level the land, because right now it's fairly unusable. It's in bad shape. It's been neglected for a long time. So we want to have a nice level playing field. We're going to surround it with a fence and some netting to protect the neighbors from the athletic equipment or balls being used on the field.
Well, thank you very much for that. You're absolutely correct that that field was in bad shape is a nice word to use.
Unusable.
It's a broken ankle waiting to happen, actually.
It is.
Yep.
I'd like to say I appreciate the CPC looking toward trying to reduce the cost of this. You said that a little bit ago, and I myself greatly appreciate that. And I also appreciate the fact that the CPC had a plan for this last year. You came forward with an article, and then you came forward with this other article to complete the circle on this, and I just appreciate that. I wanted to mention that now to thank you for that.
Chair.
Any questions or comments from the committee on Article 41, renovation of Marks Field construction phase, $518,000? Mr. Walk.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the high school football field, it was also going to be used for lacrosse. We ended up putting up a whole bunch of nets around the field so that apparently the lacrosse balls suddenly can get away at a very high speed and somebody could get hurt or somebody can damage. Is this what you're going to do at this field?
Correct, yes, we'll have poles that'll support the netting.
With the netting all around it?
Correct.
Okay, all right, thank you, that's all.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 41, renovation of Marks Field construction phase, $518,000. Hearing none. Any questions or comments from the public? Article 41, renovation of Marks Field construction phase, $518,000. Yes, Cynthia Walsh, please identify yourself for the record, even though I already have.
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street, Precinct 3. Is this going to be for both boys and girls lacrosse?
Yes, but we have both boys and girls lacrosse, and like Mark said, it would be for other sports throughout the year.
Well, as a side note, lacrosse is an indigenous sport. It was created by indigenous people, so it's a very old sport. But the thing about it now is it's become more and more popular, and I think it's another avenue for young people in Stoughton to get exercise, but also maybe a college scholarship.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public? Article 41, renovation of Marks Field construction phase, $518,000. Hearing none. Thank you so much for your presentation. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you
Next
very much.
item on the agenda. Article.
No, we got them. Yep.
Yes, but thank you, though. Next item on the agenda, we will jump over to Article 40, Stoughton Youth Baseball Field Improvements, $241,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually a little bit of a follow-up. We did approve an article last year at town meeting for some lighting and scoreboards. We'll get into what happened there, but it will help explain the dollar amounts here. For the record, this project does qualify under the CPA under recreation. The original request was for $4.2 million, but do not let that frighten you. That was for a complete renovation of the entire fields, of which there are several there, 5 or 6 off the top of my head. We asked the applicant to go back and try and come up with something that better represents the spirit of what we approved last year. And they came back to us and requested $241,000 after working with town staff members to come up with that number. Last year, town meeting had approved $145,000 for scoreboards specifically and lighting. We wrote a very specific grant agreement and motion on that article. The president, Heather Trokey, came back to me and the CPC and said, I'm sorry, but as well-meaning as that article was, we realized that the wetlands would not support the lighting in that area. And I don't want to say wetlands because I've not seen any maps from conservation stating they're wet. However, the ground is very saturated and will not support the necessary pilings to hold the lights safely. So they still need the scoreboards, but they were honest with us. So we have, from a CPC, canceled the $145,000, which we are allowed to do because this was a cash appropriation. But I wanted you to be aware of that because our net investment is $96,000 in total. I'm getting a little tired. And at any rate, this was approved in 2 pieces. The spirit of the application was approved on December 6, 2023, with a vote of 7-0 with 1 abstention, as one of the members was in a abutter. And on January 3rd, we picked our means of financing for this, which was cash. That was a vote of 7-0 again with one abstention. I briefly want to explain we did that because we had more applications than we did money when we began this project or this process in August. And I requested that we withhold any votes on how we were going to pay for it until we knew the totality of what we were going to be recommending. As you know, we've had a couple of significant projects on this particular grouping. This ended up being a cash expenditure. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Heather, where she can give you a brief rundown of the project.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I know it's getting late, so I will definitely keep this brief. While I'm happy to be back here again in front of all of you, a little context as a reminder. When we initially started this project, it was started by a different board of folks, of very well-meaning folks. And so by the time I came into the project, I really was
you did this in 3 days the last time.
I did this in a very short period of time. Okay, so I want you all to have that context. So to that end, when we realized that it really wasn't going to be feasible to put the lights up on Miller Field, given the water saturation of the area, I said, listen, we're not going to go back again and make the same mistake twice. So what the Stoughton Youth Baseball Board did was we came together and we really looked at, first of all, appointing a person who is well-versed in the area of general contracting and scope of projects, and really took a good hard look at what does the complex actually need if lights are not going to be the option. How can we utilize these funds? So we did a complete walkthrough of the complex, and we ultimately landed on some repairs to fencing that are definitely needed. Really thinking about the ADA compliance piece here for the complex. We often see family members, grandparents, siblings who, maybe have a handicap and aren't able to get around the complex as easily. So we recognize the need for that there so that they're able to watch their loved ones' baseball games. And again, just paint and repair of the dugouts, scoreboard installation, we want to continue on with that, as well as walkway repairs and AV upgrade to our sound system, as that is starting to fail us. And so these are the pieces that we landed on. We have moved away from the lights. We will not be installing lights, but hopeful for your support to move this project ahead, knowing that I will not be in front of you again next year.
And Mr. Chair, if I could follow up just as a factual statement, when applicants come to the CPC, we do give preferential treatment to ADA accessibility upgrades, of which this did, in fact, fall into that category. So,
well, thank you very much for that presentation. Questions, comments from the committee? Article 40, Stoughton Youth Baseball Field Improvements for $241,000. I think the chairman of the CPC did mention that they would be cutting back to 145 from the previous year.
We already have, so the net new investment by the town we're asking for from town meeting would be $96,000, but I wanted to be clear, it's a $241,000 ask. We took back 145 that couldn't be used, which is where the 96 comes from.
Okay, great, thank you. Questions or comments from the committee? Article 40, yes, Mr. Laurie.
Yeah, through you, Vaughn. So just to make, on that point, we're voting $241,000. I mean, the scope of the project's different. It's not the same project. So in essence, one project goes away and it's a brand new project at 241. I mean, that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're absolutely right. We're asking for $241,000. I explain that because it's important for you to put it into context.
No, that's fine.
But yes, we're asking for $241,000.
Yeah, it's the same petitioner and all that. I get it. So that means that the whole lighting thing goes away because there was a lot of back and forth about lighting, so you don't have to deal with that. So that's one less headache, right?
Yeah, so ultimately we did get the support. I mean, there were some neighbors that voiced some concern at that time, but ultimately we did get the support to move forward with the project for the lights. But as stated, it just that left field corner of Miller Field cannot support it's just too saturated over there. There's a brook that runs through. It cannot support the lights. And so without even having that left field light, there's no sense in move forward with the lights at all on the field.
Yeah, and if I could just, through you, Vaughn, just to get like a, just a high-level overview of the difference between what's the scope here and what wasn't done before, because this project obviously cost more than the original one. So if you take away lights, what's staying with, was there more to it than just lights?
Scoreboards, PA systems.
Scoreboards and PAs were part of that
Those were
last
part of the original ADA compliance
All right.
walkways, fencing, some safety measures.
Right, so when you remove lights, what comes in that drove the extra 96?
Again, ADA accessible walkways.
That was the delta?
Fencing.
Okay, that's okay.
There's a number of things.
But you didn't take ADA into consideration on the last application.
It wasn't a part of, the last application was very specific. They were asking for scoreboards and they were asking for lighting.
It didn't necessitate anything to do with ADA.
No, it did not.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And that's why I like this application. I think the applicant took a more thoughtful look at the condition overall of the plant or the facility and determined what is the best use of this money that will provide the greatest community benefit versus just, the kids will have fun under the lights. And I'm all about that, don't get me wrong. But this, I think, was a far more thoughtful approach to this project.
Well, thank you very much for that. Mr. Anzavino?
Well, I'm glad you had more notice than last time.
Thanks, John.
Me too.
That was a very unusual way for you to find out last time.
It was an unusual circumstance for sure. Yeah.
Trial by fire.
No, I like this as the chairman just mentioned. This really was more expansive than what you were doing for the whole of the fields rather than just scoreboard and lights for a few. And I'm glad to see that approach being taken. Not this organization, but the organization that was started there started in 1952. So they've been around for 72 years this year. So it's nice to see the things being fixed up and upgraded as time has gone on. They've done a lot of work for safety, and what they're doing here, a lot of what they're asking for here is just going to continue improving that. So good luck with it, and keep up the good work.
Yeah, I'll just thank you. I'll just add too, if you remember December 18th, we had a pretty intense windstorm here. And actually the fields did sustain some damage around the fencing. So it only reinforced for us the idea that the need is very real down there, specifically on the fencing repairs and so on. So I appreciate the support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 40, Stoughton Youth Baseball Field Improvements, $241,000. I'd like to say I greatly appreciate that you came back with, I guess, a better plan or whatever when the other one didn't work. Any other questions? Any questions, comments from the public? Article 40, Stoughton Youth Baseball Field Improvements, $241,000. Cynthia Walsh, please identify yourself for the record.
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street, Precinct 3. Obviously, I'm very interested in ADA compliance, but we need to also realize that anyone can use these walkways, and people that use strollers, because players have younger siblings, will find it much easier to maneuver. So it isn't just those of us who have significant issues, but it's for everybody.
Well, thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public on Article 40, Stoughton Youth Baseball Field Improvements, $241,000? Hearing none, thank you so much for your presentation tonight. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.
What's like, yes.
Please, or no?
Next item, Article 42, Stoughton Motel Conversion, $250,000.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is our last one. Article 42, Stoughton Motel conversion to affordable housing. This was brought to us by Father Bills in Mainspring. The request, both original and what we're coming to you tonight with, was for $250,000. And this does meet the requirements of the CPA under community housing. Vote was taken on December 6, 2023, and by a vote of 4-3 with one abstention, this application is being recommended to town meeting. With that said, I think it's best if I turn it over to John and Emily, who are going to give you a brief presentation, and then we're happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everyone.
I'm sorry, and it was cash. This one's cash. Sorry, go ahead, John.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Land. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Father Bills in Mainspring. I'm here with Emily Rothschild, our development consultant from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. I know it's late, so we'll give you guys a brief overview of our project and certainly get to any questions that you would like to ask. Better? All right. So there are packets in front of you which have a narrative summary as well as some of the aerial photos of the existing structure and some renderings of the site plan with some landscape details as well as what the new building is going to look like. Father Bills in Mainspring purchased this building back in June of 2023. It had been running as an existing motel since really the 1950s. We are looking to turn this building, which currently has 16 motel rooms, an adjoining house with a 4-bedroom house right behind it, and then a separate property further back that has 3 bedrooms. We are looking to turn this into 24 efficiency apartments for individuals that are currently homeless, who will be at or below the area median income, 30% of that, and people who are have documented disabilities. Father Bills in Mainspring as an agency, just in case anyone isn't aware of what we do, we're a local nonprofit that serves both Norfolk and Plymouth County. We serve about 41 towns and communities in the area. We typically serve about 4,800 people every single year. That's through emergency shelter services, both for families and individuals, a significant number of families and individuals in permanent housing programs, as well as a variety of support services. We currently have just about 700 units of permanent supported housing across the region. All of those individuals that are in there, families, veterans, they're all able to stay there as long as they like. They're tenants with leases who get supports from our case management team. We've had a long history of working in Stoughton. We've had a residential facility here for well over 20 years, and we're really excited about the opportunity to bring some more, affordable housing targeted for this population to this community. In terms of the actual project itself, what we'll be doing is looking to create efficiency apartments, which means we will be taking the existing motel rooms and bedrooms and looking to upgrade the kitchen facilities to bring in kitchenettes so everyone will have their own kitchen space, make upgrades to the bathrooms, all of the electrical, the plumbing, all of the interior facilities will be renovated. And then on the outside of the building, we'll be doing new siding, new roofing, new doors and windows, as well as a significant amount of landscaping with a new parking plan. One of the other major projects that we'll be doing is that currently those buildings are on septic systems, which are failing. And so we will be removing those septic systems and tying into the public city water and sewer lines, which will be certainly very helpful because there are wetlands in the back of the building in the area there. The other piece I'll just mention before turning it over to Emily is just that when we talk about permanent supported housing, for us, that means that there is a case manager engaging with every single person that's in these houses. So we will have a full-time case manager on site. That person is there to work on individual service plans with every person to really figure out what are the skills they need to live independently in that building. That could be connection to public benefits, connection to therapy if they need that. Sometimes it's transportation to a doctor's appointment or a ride to pick up groceries. So it's really targeted to each individual, whatever they need to help them remain stably housed. And as an agency, we take really great pride in the fact that we have really high retention rates in our housing programs. When someone goes into our housing program, we have a 97% retention rate after the first year. And after 3 years, it's 93%. So when people move into our housing programs, they stay housed and we're able to move them out of unstable housing situations into permanent housing, which is really for us the goal as we look for our mission to end homelessness in this area. In addition to the case managers that will be on site here, we will have evening and overnight staff support just for safety of the building. And there will be a van available as well for the case management team to be able to help provide transportation. One of the things we heard with some of the community meetings that we did is concerns from the neighbors that there is not a sidewalk on Washington Street in that area. And for individuals that might need to go to Roach Brothers right down the street or any of the other community areas, we wanted to make sure there was a safe way for them to get from there, and we'll be providing that for them. So I'll turn that over to Emily for remainder of community benefits.
Okay. Yeah, just a little bit to update on the project and where we're at. Hopefully it's clear from the photos that we provided that this project is taking place completely within the existing footprints of the buildings that are there. There's some expansion in the rear building that you don't see with some dormer area to get the units in the second floor. But otherwise, the building footprints will remain as is, with significant exterior improvements and full, pretty close to gut rehab inside. We've been through, we went first to the building inspector, who ruled that the building was exempt from zoning use restrictions, sent us to the planning board. The planning board and the Conservation Commission have approved the project. We submitted an application to the state for the majority of the funding. They've already put in over $2 million into the acquisition of the project. And we have an application pending for the remaining funds that we need from the state. And then we've talked to a local bank about financing. So where we're at is we're here to ask you all for $250,000, which will help fill our gap in the project. And we're waiting for the decision from the state. Just a little bit about how this impacts the community. We've taken a property that was temporary motel, and now the people who will be living there will be residents of Stoughton. When they move into their apartments, they become residents, just as anyone who moves into the community becomes a resident. There will be a 30-year, minimum of a 30-year recorded use restriction with the state money. Depending on which funds we get, it could be as much as a 50-year use restriction. We generally expect to operate these in perpetuity. I think John pretty much covered the rest.
I think the only other item just to note, and it's at the top of the summary, is just that $250,000 request does come out to just about $10,400 per unit going towards the affordable housing stock within the town.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any questions or comments from the committee? Article 42, Stoughton Motel conversion.
Vaughn.
Yes, Elliot.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The staff, who's paying for the staff? Where is the funding for the staff coming from?
Well, the units will be rent subsidized, and we carry a very limited amount of conventional debt on the property, so that the majority of the staff costs can be paid for through the rent subsidies. Also, because it's supportive housing, we get some additional supportive funding, housing for the staff from the state. And Father Bills, if they can't, if that funding isn't enough, they fundraise the remainder. They do consistent annual fundraising. So they're committed with their projects to doing 24/7 staffing.
So the staff then is, none of it's going to be paid for by the town?
No. And these projects are also structured with replacement reserves so that they're self-sustaining. So that over time, if there are repairs that are needed or things that need to be replaced, those reserves build up over time. We also, though, do a very substantial rehab so that anything that would have needed to be replaced within the next 10 years, we do that up front when the funds are more available.
Well, you answered a question before I asked it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Article 42, Stoughton Motel conversion. Lisa.
Hi, how are you? Can you just clarify what you just said about restricted use and for how long?
The funding from the state We've asked for a number of different sources. We're not sure which source they will commit, but one of their sources has a 50-year use restriction. The others, some of the others have 30-year use restrictions. We're never going to convert it, and it's the way the 30-year use restrictions work is, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not doing this. The way the 30-year use restrictions work is if you don't want to have to pay off the money, which we don't, you keep extending in 10-year increments. So basically, it's a commitment forever.
All right, thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 42, Stoughton Motel. John.
I've seen in another community where I worked previously where they took a failed motel and turned it into housing, not for this purpose, but just general studio apartments. And it worked out pretty well. It was a pretty good use because essentially it was an eyesore that they were able to turn to housing. What 1919 Washington Street, I believe its current address, it's an eyesore. It's like the old Easton Motel, if you remember that, about 30 years ago before it burned down and became Roach Brothers. So if we can prevent that becoming a eyesore that kids start playing around with and breaking into and potentially burning down, and we can turn into housing for somebody, some group, some way, shape, or form, particularly homeless individuals try to reenter society, I'm 100% in favor of this.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Mr. Anzavino.
Thank you, Mr. Anokian. Good evening. It's getting tough up here, too. I know you've gone through planning and so forth, and a lot of things were going back and forth, but because this is a pretty sizable piece of property, other than just right up at the street for the hotel, and you mentioned the back building. Are there going to be the apartments or what have you more than just in the front building? Are you actually developing the back building as well?
Yeah, there are five units.
5 units back there?
Yeah.
And
so it was a total of 23 bedrooms in the existing building, so the existing property. So we're going from 23 bedrooms to 24 bedrooms.
So how many are actually in the main building up at the street? You said there's 5 in the back. That would leave 19 in the front.
And there are 6 in the middle building. So 24 minus 11.
13. I mean, we can do them. Believe me, we can do the math. If we got the numbers, we can do the math. So there's 2 buildings in back that you're doing then? You said there's 5, 6, and then
there's the motel building. Attached to the motel building is the owner's house.
Okay.
So it's really one building because it's all attached.
You're talking the one that's perpendicular to the front?
Yeah, and then there's the little house in the back.
And then what about the rest of the property? Is that developable?
No.
None of it?
For one reason, we've been asked to put in a total of 25 parking spaces, so that used up a bunch of the back. Also, there's wetlands in back of the smaller house in back, so there's
no
way
back.
Yeah, it's a large property, but it is absolutely not developable anymore.
But
we have no intent of.
Is the majority of the parking going to be, I'll say, the street side of the building, or is it in back
About
of it?
half and half.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, street going around the side of the building, and then a lot with, I think, 12 more spaces in the rear that you won't see from the street. But we're going to take out some of the parking in the front so that we can put in some nicer landscaping. Yeah, so it'll look
all right. And they kept you to the 25, huh?
Yep.
Good.
We find about 10% of our people have cars.
Oh, that's fine.
But we will put in. Sorry.
And I might have missed it, but in I know I started I read, but time frame that you would expect to complete this if everything just moves along?
So we would, assuming that we get all of the funding that we need, we would probably start construction in September of this year. I'd like to say we'd complete it in 12 months, but that doesn't seem to be happening anymore. So,
Well, no, but that's what I thought I
by
saw.
about November, December of 2025.
Yeah.
And this, we have agreed to be last money in.
Yes,
So we would
I saw
use
that.
it, predominantly for the work that happens towards the end of the project.
Okay, no, I thought it was fall, fall next year that it was, but thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your
You're welcome.
presentation.
Thank you. Dave, you have a question?
I do, thank you, Vaughn. Through you. So people assume that because we're on the Finance Committee, we're really good at math, but we're not always great at math, especially at 10:30. Yeah, we are.
Never said
So
anything else.
I think if I did the math right, your project is $6,052,600 in total, no?
No,
I
it's
was
about
looking
10
at-
million.
Pardon?
It's about 10 million.
All right, so where did I miss? 'Cause
Well,
I'm
he
looking
did
at-
say that he didn't do math well.
Well,
Did.
it's schedule of values I'm reading, application, that's why.
I don't know where.
I'm in the application, yeah, and there's a schedule, and it's on the document itself, it's like page 32.
Well, yeah, I don't remember exactly when we gave you that budget, but the current budget is about 10 million. I'm sorry, you're looking at construction only. So total, so that is the construction.
All right.
The estimated construction is currently about, 5.4 million, including contingency. See, we carry a 10% contingency
4
on
million with
renovation projects.
contingency. Okay. And then and then
But
you
we
said
still,
that's
we
only
still need
half
to
the-
bid the project.
But that's only going to cover half the total project?
Yeah, well, there was the acquisition cost. The acquisition cost was $2,455,000, which was paid for by the state. Soft costs and fees.
So you're at 10 million?
Yeah.
All right, so,
Yeah, 9.876 is what we're projecting
all
right now.
right, so my
We'll
math
end up
would
about 10.
actually be, let's say, this funding is about 2 to 2.5% of the total, right? About that. It's
Okay.
about that. So what would happen if you didn't get this funding?
Well, the state prefers to see that we bring local funding in. So it's important to leverage state funding. Would I be honest if I said the project would die if you didn't give us the money? We're going to do anything we can to make this project a quality project and make it work. It would be extremely helpful to have these funds so that we can get into construction in the fall.
Right, and as it was said earlier, CPA can't adjust the number without getting together and voting a whole different project or whatever to get the lower. I already got the answer on that, so I don't.
Yeah, no, we could
I
choose to
understand.
revote it.
I understand. Yeah,
In any
it's
case,
a
but
different number.
I think we'd have to have that conversation with
So,
the applicant.
And we thought it
Technically-
was a conservative request.
Yeah, technically, you don't necessarily need the money, but you need it kind of in order to kind of get it kind of acceptable to different stakeholders that give money.
Yeah, if we don't get it going now, the costs go up.
Right.
So, inflation keeps pushing these up.
Right.
So it's, yeah.
Yeah, so I think as a comment, I think, our town is not for a lack of people who are hurting. We have a lot of people in this town are hurting, and it just keeps growing. So it's not like this project is going to fill a need, because we've got plenty of people who are homeless, who are hurting, that are looking for shelter. We're up to our eyeballs with folks that need help. I think if nothing else, this kind of is just adding to that inventory of people who are just not in great shape. So while it's a noble thing to try to help folks, creating a resource that's going to attract more is adding more to what we are in terms of caring as a community of how much can our community actually help. Is it going to erode the amount of help we're able to do with the people who are already here and are hurting? Does it, like how much, is it going to bring in extra funds to even support even more people that our town is having to, find resources for? I'm just letting you know that's kind of what's going on in Stoughton, from what I can tell. Everything we're seeing around us is heading in a direction that, we're not in need of more folks who are in need of help. I'm just telling you.
So Stoughton doesn't have a single adult shelter, so this is all for single adults. When people become homeless in Stoughton, they go, unless they're living in a tent in the woods, which they might be, and they would certainly be eligible, but otherwise they go to another town, to a homeless shelter. And Father Bill's serves many of those folks in their homeless shelters. They temporarily have left Stoughton. Many of them would like to return to Stoughton.
Yeah. Over the past 4 years, 70 unique individuals came to our shelter programs from a Stoughton address. And those are all adults 18 and over, not families.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Jonna, do you have a question, comment on this?
Is this going to be subjected to shelter in place?
I don't know what that means.
You can explain it better than me, and I have another question.
Isn't that the law in Massachusetts that allowed our hotels to be filled with illegal immigrants?
We're not.
She asked me a question, Vaughn. I'm answering it. I'm not going to be ignorant.
She's clarifying it.
What I would say is, I think what you're referring to is right to shelter, which is an EA regulation for the family shelter system in Massachusetts, which is completely separate from individual shelter systems. So they're completely different funding sources under EOHLC, Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities.
Also, this isn't shelter.
And this isn't shelter. This is housing. So people go in, they have a lease, they're tenants, it's their apartment to live in for as long as they need to.
Is there any chance that this is going to be filled up with more illegals? What's the problem? I'm asking a question.
It says tenant selection will be conducted in compliance with state and federal fair housing laws.
Well, that
But it says
includes the illegals.
We're not going to. Yes, Laura.
I would like to make a proposal that the people on this committee avoid using derogatory and inaccurate words such as illegals. That is completely inaccurate. The people in this town are migrants seeking asylum. Many of them have been granted asylum. But I am offended by the fact that you use the word illegals in the way that you do, especially as someone sitting on a committee for the town of Stoughton.
I am using the proper wordage, so to get annoyed with...
We're not going to have a bunch of back and forth in here.
Well, then,
No more back and forth. Yes, Mr. Walk.
so I don't get to...
I have a very quick question. Will these units be, will there be a property tax in these units? Will you be paying property tax to the town on these units?
So Father Bill's consistently, when they own property in towns, negotiates a pilot payment for each project because it's a nonprofit, as opposed to projects that are owned by LLCs, tax credit type projects. So
as part of the agreement, there'll be a negotiation on what you'll be providing to the town?
yes.
Okay, and it may not be property tax. It may be in lieu of property tax.
Payment in lieu of tax, yes.
In lieu of tax.
It'll be payment in lieu of tax.
Payment of, PIFs, okay, all right. I didn't realize that. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments from the committee on Article 42? Lauren, you have a question or comment on this?
Hi. So you said there was 70 Stoughton residents that have gone to other housing? Homeless?
So those 70 people went to our individual shelter program. So we run Father Bill's Place in Quincy, Mainspring House in Brockton, and have other outreach programs. So when we looked at the history of who came from a Stoughton address as their last residence, we found that there were 70 unique individuals, some of them who were in our programs for, sadly, several years.
So would they be on top of the list to come back to Stoughton?
I mean, certainly, like, we have a coordinated entry process to identify people. When we are talking to residents or people in case management in the shelter, we're always asking, like, where do you want to live? Where do you want to go back to? Where do you not want to go back to? So we always want to make sure we're looking to find a community that works for them.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Any other questions, comments from the committee?
I got one follow-up.
Sure, Mr. Anzavino.
Just curious, you mentioned, trying to do a pilot program. Has there been any discussions with the town about that to date, or is that something that would just come down the line?
Yeah, not yet. It's a little premature.
All right, but I mean, that would be...
We have to have a funded project
But
first.
that would be your intent to go that way?
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? Lisa?
Yes, I'm just looking to get a little more clarification how, either you, Emily, or if you could answer, when you said right to shelter is different than this project, if you could just clarify the differences. Again, I'm concerned with, I'm sorry if it offends you, to me, they are illegals. And I want, they are putting a financial burden on this town. This is asking for financial dollars for a town that this budget is seriously in deficit right now.
You're referring to the town budget, and you're referring to this article.
I'm talking about spending money in this town, and this is a $250,000 request, and I would like to know the difference in the population of how it's serving. I have a right to ask that.
This is a CPC article. This isn't part of the town budget article. This is CPC.
It's still taxpayer dollars, Vaughn. The tax-paying citizens of this town have a right to know and get answers to this question. You don't have to like it, but there are people who think differently than you may think on this issue.
What is your exact question?
Could you please clarify? You seem to know what I was asking before on right to shelter, and you were describing that this was different, and I'm just trying to understand that difference.
So the
Thank
right
you.
to shelter in Massachusetts only applies to families. It does not apply to single adults. And this is housing, this is not shelter. Is that good?
And they need to contribute? Do they earn, or is this fully subsidized by the taxpayer?
People pay
30%.
About 30% of income.
Correct.
So if they have no income, they would pay nothing. If they have income over time, or if a lot of people in the shelters have jobs. But they would pay 30% of their income, and then the rest of the rent is covered with the rent subsidy. And that adjusts as their income adjusts. Sure.
These are apartments, then?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Article 42, Stoughton Motel conversion, $250,000. Hearing none. Questions, comments from the public? Yes, Cynthia Walsh, please identify yourself for the record.
Cynthia Walsh, 1096 Park Street. Who would be homeless if she hadn't inherited 1096 Park Street from her parents. Is there any age restrictions? Everyone's
over 18.
So 18 to up. So something similar to this was done at the Congress Inn in Brockton near the VA. My mother worked there when it was a motel, and it seems to me to be quite successful. I know everyone, when they hear the word homeless, has an image, but not everybody who's homeless lives at Mass and Cass and behaves in that manner. Some low-income people, when there's a divorce, cannot afford an apartment based on their income. Some folks have lived with their parents their whole lives, but their parents don't own the house, so they don't inherit it. There are other folks that need a little extra help and encouragement to survive. And I don't think we have to worry too much about importing homeless. Ask any first responder in Stoughton, and they can tell you about people living in vans, people living in cars, And on my property, and I have to say, I had them removed, but there were 3 people living in tents. I own a farm, and that happens. You lose a job, something disastrous happens to your family. Some people share a home with family. The home, for instance, was inherited by 3 siblings. Well, as these people die, it's impossible for the remaining person to remain in the home. And if they sell it, they get a third of it, or whatever portion is theirs. Cannot buy a condo or another home. I don't think this is a bad thing. I live across the street from a group home. I live next door to an institution for folks with Alzheimer's. My cousin lives in a group home. She's on the autism spectrum in another community. For many years, family took care of family. Families don't do that anymore. When I was a kid, my father's uncle lived with us. He did chores around the house, and he was Uncle Matty. And then Uncle Matty moved on to Aunt Betty's. And then when he was through with Betty, he moved on to another relative. That's what we used to do. We have to provide a safety net for these folks. A decent, I don't know how anyone can live in one room. I mean, I live in an 8-room house by myself. Just all my junk. They're going to support these folks. Many people just need a little help. And not everybody's going to stay there their whole lives. Maybe they get a job, they get their act together, they get some mental health assistance, and before you know it, they can afford market rate. And a previous speaker on a previous petition mentioned folks coming out of foster care. They're 18 years old, and they get a garbage bag with their worldly goods in it and a kiss-off from the system. And they don't have a lot of choices. This is one of the good choices, a positive choice. They can help that person maybe get a little more education and, again, be on their way to a successful life. So I think that this is a positive thing for our town. It shows that we care about these folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public? Article 42, Stoughton Motel Conversion 200, and please identify yourself for the record. Please keep comments, questions related to Article 42.
Peter Ventresco, 587 Canton Street, Precinct 8. I am against this article spending my money and everybody taxpayer in this town on this project. That's my personal feelings. And I want to take issue with the young lady over there that chastised these 2 young ladies. Let me talk.
No,
wait
stop.
Wait a minute. You pick out certain people, you let them run rant and raise for an hour, but other people, you shut them off all the time.
Is this related to Article 42?
Yeah, what she's talking was that Article 42? No, she's written a history about a whole family.
And you spoke history for a while. I got a trip down memory lane.
Yeah, well, I'll let you know the history of a piece of property, which is important. The problem with you is you don't want to listen to certain people. Certain people in the audience, you treat them badly. Certain people on this board, you do the same thing.
I think I treat you very nicely.
No, you don't. No.
Okay.
The problem with you is you got beat up by the previous chair, and now you're taking it out of certain people here.
Got beat up.
That's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Thank you for your opinion.
What's the relevancy here?
There's no relevance to this. There is no relevance to this.
Because they called them illegal.
You are not going to continue this. Does this have anything to do with
illegals?
Do you have anything on Article 42? Do you have anything on Article 42?
That's all I want to say.
Do you have anything on Article 42?
Maybe I'm going home.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
One of the worst chairmans ever.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you for your opinion. Any other questions or comments from the public on Article 42, Stoughton Motel Conversion, $250,000?
Michael Barrett, Precinct 4, and as you saw earlier, Treasurer for the Community Preservation Committee. And I'd just like to leave, I gave you a lot of numbers earlier, but I'd like to leave you with one number, which is a little responsive to some of the comments I've heard here tonight, but it's probably one of my favorite things about the Community Preservation Act and our role in it, is that from the inception of community preservation through 2023, the town of Stoughton has received over $2.7 million in state match. Almost 28%, I think it is, but $2.7 million that this town would not have if we had not adopted the CPA. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions, comments from the public on Article 42, Stoughton Motel conversion, $250,000? Okay, hearing none. We'll go to the next item on the agenda. We have any other matters? Thank you very much, Chairman Zemanian, for coming down here.
Board, committee, rather, all the members, Mr. Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, I want to thank you. This concludes our testimony. I will look forward to your comments. I will be in attendance for your votes in the event that you have any technical questions, but it will only be me. It won't be the applicant. So thank you for your time tonight, all.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, any other matters relating to 25 or 24 budget and town meeting warrant articles? Dave.
Yeah, so I just want to make comments on the whole object of like the decorum that's needed in our meetings. When it's been said, and it's true, when you have crosstalk and you feel the need to use your gavel, it has to be even-handed. You can't just say certain people can't have crosstalk and other people can. And when it comes to like the way in which you use your gavel, that decorum that you're kind of trying to set starts at the top. It starts with the way that you handle the gavel. So I think you should just take into consideration the kind of like the way you're doing it, not just the fact that you can do it, because you absolutely can do it. But you got to first be even-handed, and you also have to have a certain kind of decorum about how you do it, and then that'll trickle through, I think, the rest of the committee, because you're going to be the leader that we all follow in how, nobody would feel like the need to just walk out of our meetings.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Mr.
I'm actually not done.
Thank you.
When I bring up a question, that sounds ignorant, and they often do, I understand that. A lot of times it's because I didn't take the time to download, print, read through the material. If I get 40 pages of electronic document, I only have a very small window to kind of pour through it, and I might overlook a little factoid within it that I want to know. But there's two things. One is I didn't read it necessarily, so I need help. And I would hope that people, when they try to help me, they think, oh, let me give them a hand, and they do it in kind of like a positive way. Hey, Dave, let me help you out there. I think I got this. I found it. And that would be terrific. But the other thing is I want it said, because I am going to tell you, that I'd say at least 50% of the people who are going to be voting in town meeting are not going to read page 14 of a 40-page document as to the answers to, what happened, when does the project end. I'll guarantee it, they won't. But when it's said out loud here, there's a good odds chance that if they just watch a FinCom meeting, that they're going to find out. So it gets said, it's on the record, so instead of being buried in our material, it's said out loud. It was something that I felt was important for the public to understand about it, and now they do. It got a little dramatic. Maybe that'll draw more attention to it than it otherwise would have. But I just want you to understand, when I ask a question that maybe I should have read, it's because I want it on the record, especially if I could get it from the petitioner to actually say out loud themselves as to a fact that I'm trying to get them to say. So there is a method to my madness about it. So I just want people to understand where I'm coming from and show a little bit of respect about Dave being ignorant about some of the material that he hadn't read. Okay, that's my comment.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dave. Jonna, do you have a comment?
Thank you very much for that, Dave. I agree with you. And then the other thing I wanted to say was, I'm not asking questions to be contentious. I really care. I live in this town. I'm seeing how things are going downhill, and I want to ask questions so we don't keep leaping into that same problem over and over again. I can't support something if I don't ask questions, and I feel like you cut me off, and I would appreciate it if you would be cognizant of that and try not to do it in the future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from the committee on this? Okay. We have a next motion on this one here, next item on the agenda.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we continue the public hearing until Wednesday, March 13th, pardon me, at 7 o'clock in the Great Hall, 3rd floor of Town Hall, 10 Pearl Street, Stoughton, Mass.
Please second, the two of us.
You both get credit?
It's a mutual second.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, motion and a...
It's called a third.
2 seconds is a third. All right. Motion and a second on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, next item.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I'm done. Dave will have to second that.
Oh, second.
Motion and a second on the floor to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We are adjourned. Have a wonderful evening. Thanks for watching.